Chapter 11:12. And just as Lin Yu and the others returned, in the sky, a few more cracks were torn in the void. A huge gate appeared in front of him. Who is it? Activate full alert. Platycodon grandiflorum, who stayed here, had a solemn expression. Cultivators of this scale, densely packed, appeared in the sky like dumplings. It was as if dark clouds had shrouded the sunlight. Just as everyone was feeling nervous, a tall and slender figure descended on the city wall of Heaven region. Lin Yu, Alliance leader. Everyone was both pleasantly surprised and surprised. Realm C is Realm C's faction. Heaven region attacked Realm C and now retreated to primitive continent. Lin Yu explained. At this time, the people of Heaven Alliance quickly let down their guard and welcomed everyone into the city. Heaven Alliance's scale was huge. It wasn't a problem to accommodate so many people. At this time, Qinyi also appeared. After seeing Supremacy Zixia, she was happy. Master, Supremacy Zixia smiled and held Qinyi's hand. At the same time, she looked at Lin Yu, who was standing in front of everyone, and then looked at Qinyi with a gratified expression. Her Zixia C region's existence was all thanks to Lin Yu. Qin Wunyan appeared, and in just a day, he had settled everyone in Realm C. Then, Qin Wunyan reported to Lin Yu about Heaven Alliance's development. I'm relieved to leave Heaven Alliance to you. Lin Yu nodded to Qin Wunyan with satisfaction. At the same time, their mood was a bit depressed, like the night before the storm, especially heavy. Heaven region had declared war on Realm C, and the result was Realm C retreating to primitive continent. And this time, they didn't see the six-winged Divine King take action, as if he had other plans. Perhaps he expected that Lin Yu would be corroded by the abominable source. Even if he didn't die, he would lose half his life. He should have been hiding in primitive continent and didn't dare to appear in Realm C. Otherwise, under the temptation of the Divine King badge, the six-winged Divine King might have set an ambush. As for the six-winged God King, his thoughts were profound. If he didn't make a move this time, then there must be something more important. He's using the abominable essence to absorb the power of the cultivators who died in the battle. Lin Yu slowly said in the hall. This time, the casualties of Realm C and Heaven Domain's cultivators were no less than 100 million. Such a massive number was all collected by the six-winged Divine King. Looks like he's really preparing to break through to the Divine King realm. The Dark Divine Priest's expression was grave as he sighed. But at the moment, there was no practical way to deal with it. It's extremely difficult to break through to the Divine King realm. I won't break through just because of this little bit of energy. Archaeosaurus stood up and voiced his conjecture. At this moment, they all looked at Lin Yu. He had the deepest contact with the abominable origin, and was also the person who understood it the most in their camp. I don't think so. The six-winged Divine King wants to absorb the strength of the cultivators to strengthen himself. However, the souls of the dead cultivators have been stripped. Lin Yu mentioned something he had noticed on the battlefield. The abominable origin could corrupt and devour everything. And it was clear that the abominable origin didn't directly devour the cultivators' souls this time. Instead, it took them away. This was very doubtful. Cultivators were divided into cultivation and consciousness. Both contained the strength of a cultivator's entire life. Logically speaking, if the six-winged Divine King wanted to absorb power, he wouldn't have taken away the souls, but directly absorbed them on the spot. There wouldn't be so much trouble. Lin Yu thought that behind the six-winged Divine King, there might be beings from other universes. Perhaps the six-winged Divine King was able to obtain the abominable origin because of this mastermind. While the six-winged Divine King obtained power, he also paid a price. And this price was very likely related to the 12 universes. And in the universe, living beings were an indispensable part of it. In other words, the souls of the hundreds of millions of living beings were given to the mastermind. If that was really the case, then the mastermind scheme was too great. Lin Yu realized the seriousness of the matter. The six-winged Divine King's strength advanced by leaps and bounds in these 3 million years, and it was related to the abominable origin. And the abominable origin needed to absorb and plunder a large amount of power between heaven and earth. Then, after such a long time had passed, just how many living beings had suffered calamity? It was already difficult to go back. This kind of power violates the heavenly Tao. It's too despicable. The Realm Sea Lord smashed the table. The souls of the disciples of the Realm Sea forces were all rejected, which also meant that they would never be able to enter reincarnation. They completely disappeared from the world. Furthermore, in this battle, Sovereign 9 Nether also completely perished. To the Realm Sea forces, this existence on the celestial deity list was a huge blow to them. The entire 9 Nether Sea region was completely wiped out. This was done by Lin Xiao. Lin Yu said that he saw Lin Xiao in the chaotic Demon Sea region back then. Lin Xiao, it was the enemy I encountered in this world back then, the 7-Yi Demon Emperor who used methods to create someone with the same talent and appearance as me. Lin Yu replied indifferently. It's him who killed Sovereign 9 Nether. Not long ago, in order to pursue power, he sought refuge with the 6-winged Divine King. Regarding Lin Xiao's betrayal, Lin Yu described it casually, without the slightest change in his emotions. Only Qin Wunyan sighed at the side. He and Lin Xiao had been together for a very long time and had already established a friendship between them. Regarding Lin Xiao's disappearance, he was very puzzled at first. He didn't expect that the news at this time was that he had already sought refuge with the enemy. Lin Xiao had always had the heart to surpass Lin Yu. Perhaps it was precisely because of his desire for power that he was bewitched by the 6-winged Divine King and became his subordinate. Darkness Divine Priest, and the rest frowned somewhat. A complete copy of Lin Yu. The appearance could be ignored, but talent and state of mind. These 2 points could definitely create a formidable opponent. Furthermore, the 6-winged Divine King currently still grasped the abominable origin, which could definitely allow Lin Xiao to break through quickly. It was also in such a short time that Lin Xiao already had an existence sufficient to kill a powerhouse on the celestial deity list. Furthermore, Lin Xiao also understood many things about Lin Yu. If it really reached the end, he would definitely be a tough stumbling block. This was undoubtedly somewhat troublesome. No matter, he doesn't have that strength. Lin Yu was indifferent. He didn't care about other people's betrayal. From a certain aspect, Lin Xiao was originally created for a purpose to deal with Lin Yu. It was just that there was a turn for the better later on. However, Lin Xiao ultimately wasn't considered a normal and healthy human. Hence, he would deliberately imitate Lin Yu's every move, wanting to make up for the defect in his heart. Perhaps it was also precisely because of this that Lin Xiao was bribed by the 6-winged Divine King and joined their camp. In order to pursue absolute power, this point might not be wrong in itself for cultivators and humans. Chapter 11:13. Qin Wunyan was heartbroken, but now that things had come to this, they could only meet on the battlefield and fight to the death. Lin Yu and the rest discussed for an entire day. They did not stay for too long. The current primordial continent was protected by the great sun, boundless Buddha. The 6-winged Divine King did not dare to invade for the time being. But the 6-winged Divine King had already started to absorb the energy of the 12 universe's living beings. It was very likely that he was accumulating energy to break through to the Divine King realm. But there was no use being anxious now. In the meantime, after settling everyone down, Lin Yu went to see the great sun, boundless Buddha again. After giving everyone some instructions, he entered a deep level of seclusion. He had to refine the origin substance in his body as soon as possible. This would be his greatest reliance when fighting the 6-winged Divine King in the future. The most important thing now was to raise his cultivation. In the quiet seclusion ground, Lin Yu closed his eyes and pondered. His current cultivation was advancing too quickly. He had to settle down for a period of time. Otherwise, it might cause his foundation to be unstable and cut off his path forward. And what he had to do now was to further cultivate the Great Void 8 parts and merge them into one. This was the best way to increase his combat strength at the moment. And just as Lin Yu was wholeheartedly deducing the Great Void 8 parts, he suddenly felt his heart tremble. An inexplicable aura appeared in his body. It was strange and domineering as it began to destroy his vitality. This power was very strange and inexplicable. He did not know where it came from, and it was hard to guard against. And at this moment, a figure sat cross-legged above the Broken Realm Sea's boundless sea region. His entire body was surrounded by the origin of extreme evilness. It had already materialized and was like an evil dragon that circled around his body. In the sky above Realm Sea, all matter was polluted and turned pitch black, emitting a foul stench. If an ordinary person was beside him, they would have already turned into eerie white bones at this moment, their body and soul destroyed. The power was just too terrifying. Its control over the abyssal origin had even surpassed the six-winged God Kings. It had completely fused with the six-winged God King. From time to time, one could see the twisted faces of living beings within the black gas that surrounded him. These were the souls of living beings that were constantly being corroded and refined. At the same time, these living souls were also suffering endless torment. It was even more frightening than the tortures of the 18 levels of hell. The number of living souls, under his perception, exceeded millions and millions. Right now, they were roaring in pain, sounding like demonic sounds, making even heaven and earth change color. A rain of blood descended, dyeing Realm Sea red. The silhouette was shrouded in black mist, and his appearance could not be seen clearly. Only a pair of withered palms could be seen. At this moment, he was holding something in his palms. If one were to look carefully, they would see that it was a clay sculpture. Surprisingly, the appearance of the clay sculpture was exactly the same as Lin Yu. As the silhouette's withered finger tapped on the clay sculpture's head, a black mist appeared. It was difficult to detect, and it was indistinct. It entered the primitive continent from the bottom of the boundless sea, directly into the body of Lin Yu, who was still in seclusion in the Sky Alliance. This technique was too strange. It could kill without leaving a trace. Even the Vairocana Buddha, who was guarding the primitive continent, did not detect any clues at this moment. At this moment, Lin Yu seemed to have fallen into a deep slumber. However, his consciousness was very clear. He could clearly sense that someone had attacked him. Moreover, the method was extremely cruel and vicious. The person actually wanted to extract his soul and turn him into a living dead. At this moment, the Emperor Cauldron in Lin Yu's sea of consciousness shone. At the same time, his consciousness became extremely condensed, turning into a small golden person. At this moment, he wanted to trace the origin and find the person who wanted to kill him. However, as the silhouette in the boundless sea's hand strengthened the strange power in it, Lin Yu's consciousness actually burned with black flames. He wanted to take the initiative to enter nirvana. This trend was almost irreversible. Do you think you can escape from this old man's palm? The old man's hoarse voice was like an evil spirit from hell. Just hearing it made one's hair stand on end. At this moment, the six-winged divine king stood at the side and watched this scene with satisfaction. My younger brother, do you think you can be safe and sound by retreating to the primitive continent? There was a cold smile at the corner of his mouth. He thought about how his heavenly marriage was disrupted in front of everyone. In the end, his fiancée, the jade pure divine lady, was even taken away. He couldn't help but hate Lin Yu even more. In his eyes, Lin Yu had to die. In this 12 universes, there was only one divine king, and that was him, the six-winged divine king, and not some divine king's youngest son, Lin Yu. And to use this strange and boundless divine ability, one needed to obtain something from the target. And the silhouette was naturally related to Lin Xiao. It was a strand of Lin Yu's hair that he brought. And meeting in the chaotic demon sea was also Lin Yu's intention. It was to use the thing that the old man gave him to clearly imprint Lin Yu's aura. It was for the sake of carrying out this step. Otherwise, when sensing the fall of the thunder god and wind god, the six-winged divine king would have already rushed to the realm sea and was about to make a move on Lin Yu. Now, the plan was watertight and was completed perfectly. If there were no accidents, Lin Yu wouldn't be able to live today and would be erased from this world henceforth. This strange power involved a deep level. This was a complete erasure of a person's existence. It was also the imprint of his existence in this world that had to be completely eliminated at the moment of his death. This was erasing a person from his source. It was very vicious and made it difficult for people to have any means to counteract. The six-winged divine king looked behind him at Lin Xiao, who was standing respectfully at the side, and nodded his head in satisfaction. "You did well this time." Lin Xiao just cupped his hands and bowed indifferently. "It's my honor to be able to work for the divine king." "Good." The six-winged divine king smiled. "Now that the darkness divine priest has betrayed, his position will be replaced by you. Many thanks for the divine king's kindness." Lin Xiao expressed his gratitude, only to see a black gilded token appear in his hand. This was the proof of taking charge of the darkness temple. Taking control of the darkness temple, it's time to properly purge the people and matters inside. Lin Xiao was expressionless as he looked at the darkness temple token in his hand. Lin Yu's current divine sense was like a candle in the wind, on the verge of collapse. But everyone in the outside world did not detect this. They were all carrying out their own matters in an orderly manner, completely unaware that their alliance leader was currently in a dangerous situation. This power was very strange, seemingly intentionally isolating the power of the divine king token. Lin Yu maintained his calm all along. In the end, his divine sense even sat down cross-legged, allowing that strange flame to burn. The figure above the boundless sea snickered. "What? Have you already given up?" The Emperor Cauldron suppressed Lin Yu's divine sense within, minimizing the damage. Fortunately, because of the 100,000 years of samsara, his divine sense had become incomparably tough and powerful. Otherwise, if it were any other Emperor Realm cultivator, they would have very likely met with disaster and nothing would be left behind. Is it the aura of the abominable origin again? Lin Yu thought to himself. But this method was different from the one the six-winged divine king had. Lin Yu already understood this point. At this moment, a majestic black shadow appeared in Lin Yu's sea of consciousness. The abominable origin revolved around it like an evil dragon. The moment it appeared in Lin Yu's sea of consciousness, Lin Yu felt as if his entire divine sense was about to collapse. Large holes had been torn in many places, as if it would be completely destroyed at any moment. If one's divine sense was compared to a universe, the appearance of the black figure had already surpassed the limits of what this universe could bear. It was filled with a destructive power that was spreading. The tiny figure formed by Lin Yu's divine sense was currently calm and unruffled. "You must be the person behind the six-winged divine king from the other universes. You're very smart, but you can't reverse the situation." The black figure cackled. "The six-winged divine king and I have plotted for 1,000,000 years. How can an ant like you overturn us? I'm now powerless to reverse the situation and am about to die. I want to know, what is your goal in invading the 12 universes?" Lin Yu's divine sense was currently extremely weak, but he still did not show the slightest anxiety or fear. Chapter 11:14. A dead person doesn't need to know so much. When your friends and family reach the underworld, they will naturally tell you. The black shadow smiled, but then he thought, being obliterated by the all-sky curse, you probably won't fall into the cycle of reincarnation. You will never know. The black shadow was obviously very shrewd. Although he was very confident in his all-sky curse, just in case, Lin Yu spread the news. He did not reveal his plan. However, the 12 universes, this undeveloped land, has things that are really surprising. You can go in peace. The black shadow continued. At this moment, the strange aura on his body became more and more intense. Lin Yu's knowledge, was collapsing more and more violently. It was as if a part of the universe was collapsing, and it was irreversible. Lin Yu's knowledge, was covered with ferocious black lines. They carried a destructive aura and were incomparably domineering. Even Lin Yu's body, which was in seclusion, was entering a state of decay. His skin lost its luster, and his essence, energy, and spirit became very dispirited. Like a candle in the wind, It swayed and could be extinguished at any time. Lin Yu's consciousness avatar side. In its deep eyes, a cold light bloomed. Suddenly, a mysterious white light surrounded his body. It was hazy and natural, and it carried an endless aura of life. The originally irreversible nirvana aura was actually stagnating at this moment. Like ice encountering blazing fire, that strange power actually started to melt. Then, it turned into nothingness and dissipated. This power, impossible. It's the origin substance. How can you control it? The Black Shadow was shocked. Since you are unwilling to speak, there will be a way. Lin Yu said indifferently. With a flick of his finger, he used his knowledge see as a cage. The white light split into millions of rays. Like an indestructible divine gold chain, it directly sealed this place completely. At this moment, the black figure above the boundless sea region suddenly opened his eyes. At this moment, the floating clay statue in front of him shattered instantly. It could no longer affect Lin Yu's body on the primitive continent. His body could not help but tremble slightly. What happened? The six-winged divine king stepped forward and asked. When he saw the Black Shadow in such a state, he suddenly had a bad premonition. Lin Xiu was also a little surprised. How could such a person, who had surpassed the peak of the sage realm, fail? My divine sense has been completely severed from my body. I can no longer communicate with it. The black figure tried his best to make his tone as calm as possible. After all, his strand of divine sense was separated from his main body by a world. It was difficult for him to send back information quickly, which was why he encountered this unforeseen event. He couldn't help but frown. Lin Yu wasn't killed. The six-winged divine king frowned slightly. He had not expected that this person would still fail despite using such a powerful method. But it doesn't matter. Lin Yu's divine soul and body are almost decayed. I believe that even if he doesn't die, it will take him a long time to recuperate and recover. The Black Shadow heaved a long sigh of relief. He came to the 12 universes and planned for 1,000,000 years. And the biggest variable was the youngest son of the old king of gods, Lin Yu. Although he didn't kill him this time, he was seriously injured and on the verge of death. It would be hard for him to achieve anything during this period of time. At that time, everything would no longer be a problem. Speaking up to here, the six-winged divine king nodded his head. My younger brother really is quite a lot of methods, repeatedly surprising people. But the six-winged divine king also knew the might of this sky-filling curse. To be able to make the mastermind, who had surpassed the peak of the sage realm, take action, it was already considered going to great lengths. As long as the subsequent matters could be completed without being stopped. The primitive continent was also no longer the shackle that stopped the six-winged divine king's footsteps. At that time, even if the great sun boundless Buddha didn't prostrate at his feet, he wouldn't fall. Thinking up to here, the six-winged divine king threw that wisp of uneasiness in his heart to the back of his mind. From now on, no one could stop his footsteps of rising. Not long later, the entire 12 universes would praise his awe-inspiring name, the six-winged divine king. Since the matter is settled, then return first. As he said, the six-winged divine king instructed Lin Xiu. The two people's figures disappeared above the realm sea. After the six-winged divine king and Lin Xiu left, the black figure sighed. The unforeseen event just now happened too quickly, and he didn't even have time to react. I hope that nothing unexpected happened. Although he was certain that Lin Yu didn't die now, his vitality was definitely greatly damaged, and he was almost completely wiped out. But he still had a faint premonition in his heart. At this moment, he took out the token in his hand. As it slowly glowed, a message was sent out. When Lin Yu first entered the Qingyun realm, he met the owner of the treasure map pavilion in a city. He was also a trusted follower of the dark divine priest. At this moment, a black pattern appeared on his forehead. It was very bewitching and evil. The woman's eyes gradually brightened, but they quickly returned to normal. But there was a trace of viciousness in the depths of her eyes. Go and summon the trusted aid of the dark god priest. Hide among them and find out the specific situation. The black figure spoke up slowly. Following that, he also disappeared from the boundless sea region, his whereabouts unknown. As for the beautiful woman in the treasure map pavilion, after returning to normal, she spoke to her servants and disappeared from the treasure map pavilion. Then, she began to contact the remaining subordinates of the Dark God Priest. She was preparing to head to the primitive land together. In the Heaven Alliance, under the peaceful atmosphere, an earth-shattering scene was playing out in the seclusion area. After Lin Yu turned his sea of consciousness into a cage, the origin substance rapidly repaired his decaying physical body and mind sense. As for the mind sense that the black figure had left behind, although his body was powerful, he was too far away and was now under the vast origin substance. The extreme evil origin that he had mastered was originally the bane of the origin substance. At this moment, no matter how powerful he was, he couldn't resist. In the end, he could only be suppressed by Lin Yu. "Do you think that you can trap me?" At this moment, the black figure spoke slowly. Once again, a bright black aura erupted from his body. He directly attacked the cage. "In this vast world, no one dares to trap me with a cage." The cage made of the origin substance showed signs of collapsing under the power of the black figure. "Is that so?" At this moment, a great sun suddenly appeared in the sky above Lin Yu's sea of consciousness. The pure and vast aura was magnified infinitely under the majestic voice. Under the intertwining runes of the sun, the illusory figure of the great Sun Buddha appeared. At this moment, he stretched out his palm as if he was holding a part of the universe. Directly, he pressed down on the black figure. "It's you, the most ancient expert in the 12 universes, the great Sun Buddha." At this moment, the black figure's expression changed drastically. He originally thought that everything was done secretly and that even the great Sun Buddha wouldn't be able to detect it. However, why did the great Sun Buddha appear in Lin Yu's sea of consciousness now? "You were prepared." The black figure understood. Lin Yu had been on guard all along. The power of the great Sun Buddha had been dormant in Lin Yu's body all along and only revealed itself at this moment. "Brat, good plan." The black figure wasn't stingy with his compliments. Under the mighty great sun runes, the black figure couldn't do anything and was directly suppressed. It turned out that after returning to the primordial continent, before Lin Yu went into seclusion, he went to find the great Sun Buddha and made preparations. It was to prevent any unforeseen events that might occur because of his betrayal. Chapter 11:15. The black shadow had already been suppressed. It was imprisoned by the origin substance, and its origin was being consumed continuously. However, Lin Yu and the Vairocana Buddha did not destroy it immediately. This was because they had more important things to understand. What was the purpose of the other universes coming to the 12 universes? From the Black Shadow's words, it seemed that the 12 universes had something that the other universes did not. Lin Yu also came out of seclusion. Alliance leader, you are out of seclusion? Qin Wenyin was now in charge of the development of the Heavenly Alliance and was very busy every day. Now that he saw Lin Yu coming out of seclusion, he was very happy. However, at the same time, he did not understand why Lin Yu came out of seclusion so quickly. Before Lin Yu went into seclusion, he had instructed him to do many things. From the looks of it, he should be in seclusion and would not come out so quickly. At this moment, the Dark High Priest also came to the main hall. "Your Highness." The Dark High Priest was summoned by Lin Yu. This time, he did not come out of seclusion ostentatiously, but was very secretive. The Dark High Priest seemed to have guessed something. "I need to go to the Vairocana Buddha and may only return after some time," Lin Yu said slowly. "What happened?" The Dark High Priest frowned. If not, Lin Yu would not have come out of seclusion secretly and only summoned him. It involves the mastermind behind the six-winged Divine King. Lin Yu said unhurriedly. "Did he attack you, Your Highness?" Hearing Lin Yu's words, the Dark High Priest's expression changed. At the same time, he felt a little fearful. Even though they were in a different world, he still had the means to hurt Lin Yu. Such strange means were unavoidably terrifying. Lin Yu nodded faintly in response to the Dark Grand Priest's question. Going to the Buddha Supreme is also good. The dark high priest nodded solemnly. If that was the case, perhaps only the Mahavajrana Buddha Lord would be able to protect Lin Yu and allow him to cultivate in peace. This time, Lin Yu did not alert anyone. Before he left, he instructed the dark divine priest and Qin Wenyan, this time, don't tell anyone. Also, announce to the public that there is a problem with my cultivation. I will not come out for a period of time. Qin Wenyan and the dark priest nodded solemnly. As for how to secretly spread the news of Lin Yu being seriously injured, Qin Wenyan and Qin Wushuang would naturally have a way. After that, Lin Yu concealed his aura and disappeared from the Heaven Alliance. Time passed. Lin Yu arrived at the secret location of the Vairocana Buddha Lord. At this time, it was very mysterious. Only Archaeosaurus and a few others had been here before. The moment he entered this place, Lin Yu arrived at the place where the great solar Buddha elder was. You're here. The appearance of the great solar boundless Buddha Lord still gave off an extremely ordinary feeling. Yes, Lin Yu nodded his head. Then, his palm shone and a suppressed black shadow appeared. At this time, he had already been compressed into a ball. As the great solar boundless Buddha Lord waved his sleeves, all the aura in this place was covered. Heaven's secrets were concealed, causing this place to be completely out of the 3 realms and 5 regions. No one could investigate. Naturally, this included all the information that could not be transmitted or transmitted. How dare you treat this old one like this? Ants, you will die a terrible death. Although the black shadow was weak at this time, he was still lofty and threatening. The great solar boundless Buddha Lord was unaffected by the insults. Instead, he spoke slowly. Why have you come to the 12 universes? You are just an uncivilized native of the wilderness. Why do you have to make this old one speak? The black shadow sneered in disdain. You have spent so many years, and yet you're only a half-step divine king. The 12 universes are indeed too weak. We can get everything we want with just a little bit of effort. Let me tell you clearly, even if you know, you won't be able to do anything. After the black shadow finished his words, his tone was filled with a strong sense of disdain. Lin Yu's face was cold. With a flick of his finger, strands of origin energy circled around and pierced through the abdomen of the black shadow. The black shadow howled in pain. However, Lin Yu did not stop there. He stuck out a few more fingers and chopped off the 4 limbs of the black shadow. Ant, I'll make you pay back this humiliation 100 times in the future. Facing the torture, the black shadow was still unfazed. He spoke boldly and fiercely. I'll suppress you in the latrine pit for 100 or 1,000 years before releasing you back to your original body. Lin Yu rubbed his chin and pondered. Even though the damage wasn't that great, the humiliation was extremely strong. For a powerful being like the Black Shadow, this was too much of a slap in the face. This was definitely a humiliation that could not be washed away in this lifetime. I feel that this is a good suggestion. The stoic, great solar boundless Buddha Lord nodded his head at this moment as well, agreeing to Lin Yu's suggestion. You guys are courting death. The Black Shadow gritted his teeth. However, now that he was suppressed, he had no way of resisting. With that, Lin Yu stretched out his hand and tore the Black Shadow into 5 parts. He then sealed one of them in a jar. It seemed like he was really going to suppress him in the latrine pit. You really dared to do that? Even though the Black Shadow was torn apart, this strand of spiritual consciousness was still considered strong because it had to cross a realm. Hence, even though it was torn apart, it could still maintain its consciousness at this moment. Seeing Lin Yu's way of doing things, he felt a chill down his spine. I don't want to hear what you have to say now. With that, Lin Yu sealed the jar with layers of origin energy before tossing it out. The jar turned into a stream of light and flew out of the secret ground. Then, it landed right in the latrine pit of the commoners. With a plop, a string of water splashed out. I want you to die a horrible death. Even with his mental state that had cultivated for countless years, he was still on the verge of breaking down at this moment. This was definitely the greatest humiliation of his life. He had never encountered something like this before. Then, the remaining 4 strands of spiritual consciousness slowly merged together and turned into the original appearance of the Black Shadow. At this moment, his eyes were filled with endless murderous intent. Buddha Supreme, now is the time. Lin Yu said. The great solar Buddha, Venerable, nodded. He stretched out his hand and grabbed the black shadow that had merged into his hand. The sunlight was ancient and bright, illuminating the heavens and the earth. It was grand and majestic, simple and ancient. On one hand, Lin Yu did this to dampen his spirit. He kept calling them ants and was full of disdain and contempt for the 12 universes. At the same time, the spiritual consciousness of the 12 universes' living beings could be heard from his body. This already made one feel uncomfortable. More importantly, it was to make the black shadow reveal a flaw and cause his thoughts to change. Only then could the great solar Buddha, Venerable, forcefully invade his spiritual consciousness and find out what they wanted to know. You guys are so scheming. The black shadow roared. He felt that his spiritual consciousness was about to be forcefully invaded by the great solar Buddha Venerable and was about to be searched. By then, all of his secrets would be revealed without a doubt. At the same time, the black shadow was filled with regret. In terms of mental state, he seemed to be much weaker than the great solar Buddha Venerable that he had mocked as an ant. The black shadow struggled. In the end, he went all out and dragged himself into destruction. As the black shadow turned into dust, it dissipated from the world. As for the remnant extreme evil origin, it was completely wiped out by Lin Yu. Even a single strand of the extreme evil origin left in the 3 realms and 5 regions could lead to unimaginable disastrous consequences. This was because the polluting properties of this substance were way too strong. Everything that came into contact with it could be assimilated by it. Buddha Supreme, how is it? Lin Yu inquired about the situation. This spiritual consciousness is too damaged. The information I can obtain is incomplete and limited. The great solar Buddha Venerable sighed. Chapter 11:16. What we know now is that the 6-winged Divine King has completely surrendered to this universe. Even the death of the old Divine King had something to do with this universe. At this point, a rare murderous intent appeared in the eyes of the calm, great solar Buddha Venerable. He had deep feelings for the 12 universes and pitted everything in the world. Moreover, he had a close relationship with the old Divine King and was a close friend. He knew that the death of the old Divine King had something to do with the other universes. His heart was filled with grief. He was a genius of his generation. He had hopes of leading the 12 universes to greater heights. In the end, he was betrayed by his own son, who colluded with the people of the other universes to persecute him to death. The people of the other universes have always stood behind the 6-winged Divine King and helped him. At the same time, the 6-winged Divine King used the true spirits of the living beings of the 12 universes as an exchange to obtain the power to ascend. The great solar Buddha Venerable obtained limited information from an incomplete consciousness of the Black Shadow. It was just that the boundless great solar Buddha did not know which universe it was. However, no matter which universe it was, there had always been someone plotting behind the scenes. Anyone who meddled with the 12 universes and persecuted the old Divine King would have a hard time in the future. No matter what the reason is, I will head to that universe and seek justice for my father and the 12 universes. Lin Yu said coldly. In the end, he slowly spat out a sentence. They won't succeed. The great solar Buddha Venerable nodded. You shall cultivate here in the days to come. The great solar Buddha Venerable was worried that the mastermind from the other universes would have strange methods. He was worried that there would be some tricks up their sleeves that would be hard to guard against and cause problems for Lin Yu's cultivation. As for the current situation, Lin Yu could not be allowed to have any problems. He was the youngest son of the old Divine King and the future successor of the Divine King of the 12 universes. The great solar Buddha Venerable could not allow any accidents to happen to him. Due to the laws, the mastermind is unable to use his full strength. Otherwise, I would not be able to resist him in my current state. The great solar Buddha, Venerable, was worried. From the incomplete consciousness of the Black Shadow, he had a rough understanding of the realm of the Black Shadow. He had definitely surpassed the peak of the Saint realm and reached the Divine King realm. However, due to the restrictions of the 12 universes, he could not use the power of the Divine King realm. However, the great solar boundless Buddha, Lord, guessed that after 1,000,000 years, the mastermind was no longer severely restricted after absorbing the true spirits of the living beings of the 12 universes. That was the reason why he would make a move on Linyu. This was a bad omen. This meant that Linyu might be facing 2 God Kings in the final battle. This would be incomparably difficult, and there was no hope at all. However, Linyu did not show any signs of fear. When I come out of seclusion, it will be the day to rescue Heavenly Phoenix and start the final battle, Linyu said slowly. According to the great solar boundless Buddha's prediction, the 6-winged Divine King would definitely sacrifice the living beings of the 12 universes within 30 years and break through to the God King realm. At that time, everything would return to nothingness. The 12 universes would truly enter nirvana. Not only the great solar Buddha, but even Linyu would not allow such a thing to happen. His father had once loved the living beings of this universe deeply. He wanted to inherit the legacy of the old God King and protect the 12 universes. Linyu had already made up his mind. At this moment, a hazy consciousness descended upon Linyu's body. It was as though the laws of the 12 universes were starting to acknowledge Linyu. This was the first step to inheriting the throne of the God King. The great solar boundless Buddha, Lord, nodded his head in satisfaction. The God King realm was never a realm, but a responsibility. Clearly, Linyu had already fulfilled it. For the sake of the 12 universes, he would fight the unknown enemy and overthrow the greatest scourge of the 12 universes, the 6-winged Divine King. According to the legends, the great solar boundless Buddha, Lord, was the one with the greatest hope of breaking through to that realm. However, for the sake of all living beings, he had turned into the great sun in the sky and used his own light to allow all living beings to live in peace. He had given up on advancing to the God King realm. Linyu opened his eyes silently. Then, under the protection of the great solar boundless Buddha Lord, he entered a state of seclusion. He now had a chance to use the power of the old God King. The mighty power of the God King realm was boundless. Under the great solar boundless Buddha Lord's warning, this power could not be used rashly. It could only be used when one's cultivation base was at the Saint realm. In order to rescue Sky Phoenix, Linyu had to break through to the Saint realm in the shortest time possible and become one of the top powerhouses in the 12 universes. Otherwise, the forces he led would have no chance of winning in the battle to rescue Sky Phoenix. Even the Archaeosaurs and the others, who were ranked at the top of the Demon God list, had no chance of winning against the 6-winged Divine King and the mastermind behind scenes. They had been stuck at the Saint realm for countless years. It was simply impossible for them to break through in a short period of time. The heavy burden of resisting the 6-winged Divine King and the mastermind behind the scenes fell on Linyu alone. Rescuing Sky Phoenix and obtaining the complete inheritance of the old God King were the most necessary conditions to qualify for the final battle. Furthermore, Sky Phoenix's strength was ranked at the top of the Saint realm. If they could rescue her, their chances of winning would be much higher. The great solar boundless Buddha Lord was now imprisoned in the primitive continent and could not leave. Now, the top forces in Linyu's camp were the Dark Divine Priest, the Archaeosaurs, the Sea God Dragon, and the Jade Pure Goddess. This was definitely not enough for the 6-winged Divine King, who had developed for 3,000,000 years and had the support of other universes. Sky Phoenix had to be rescued. Linyu pondered silently for a while and then calmed down. He saw the origin substance revolving around him. The Yao Qi in his body was circulating and refining this mysterious substance. If Linyu wanted to break through to the Saint realm in a short period of time, he could only refine the origin substance. It was also because of this that Lin Yu had hope of breaking through to the Saint Realm in 30 years and becoming one of the top powerhouses in the 3 realms and 6 domains. The great solar boundless Buddha, Lord, looked at Lin Yu and sighed softly. Then he closed his eyes, and his consciousness enveloped the entire primitive continent. Not even the slightest clue could escape his detection. Lin Yu was currently in closed-door cultivation. His entire being was enveloped by origin matter, making him look like the first god to be born at the birth of heaven and earth. He was hazy yet powerful. Mysterious and profound energy flowed through his body, causing his late-stage Emperor Realm cultivation to advance once more. The Saint Realm was no longer something that could be entered simply by reaching a bottleneck in strength. It required one's own understanding of the Tao to know where one's own path should be. However, with the approval of the 12 universal laws, Lin Yu also had a preliminary understanding of his own Tao. He was not in a hurry. Instead, he continued to refine the origin substance in his body. As time passed, Lin Yu was not in a hurry. Instead, he focused on seeking a new realm. Over the past 3 months, he had been examining the realms in front of him. Even though he had reached the flawless realm in every realm during his cultivation, he was still unable to break through. Although he'd perfected his cultivation in perfect perfection, there were still many flaws when he looked back. Now, he'd completely resolved them. He'd laid down a flawless foundation for breaking through to the Saint Realm. Chapter 11:17. At this moment, Lin Yu was like an old monk who had entered a meditative state. He was calm as the origin substance coiled around his body. It was as though the heavens and earth were being born where he stood. At this moment, Lin Yu's process of refining the origin substance had slowed down slightly. I've heard Bai Shaoli mention before that the 12 universes and the 10 sacred grounds were all created by humans. This means that there will be a day when the universe will be destroyed as well. Lin Yu pondered in his heart. As for my own Tao, it shouldn't be restricted by the heavens and earth. There would be a day when the heavens and earth would be destroyed, and the 12 universes would be born in an unknown era. In other words, even though the powerful beings of the heavens and earth had an endless lifespan, they were all dependent on the universe. If the universe were to be destroyed one day, they would naturally return to nothingness as well. Within Lin Yu's consciousness, a chaos god Thunder was born, bringing with it an aura that could destroy everything. Clearly, Lin Yu was still unable to reach such a profound state at this moment. Lin Yu sensed something in his heart. The problem he was thinking about right now was probably above the God King state. Rumble, between the heavens and earth, the chaos god Thunder was being formed and gathering, as though it could strike down at any moment. The entire primitive continent could sense it. At this moment, all the living beings on the primitive continent were looking at a certain spot on the primitive continent in unison. The great solar Buddha Lord was startled as well. He opened his eyes and was surprised in his heart. What has the little God King comprehended that he could trigger the chaos god Thunder to punish him? The chaos god Thunder was a rare sight. Even a God King would be shocked when faced with this thunder. It wasn't something that someone of Lin Yu's level could come into contact with. But now, because of Lin Yu's comprehension, such a phenomenon was formed between the heavens and earth. This terrifying aura was enough to destroy the heavens and earth. But now, it was locked onto a single person. At this moment, the great solar Buddha Lord frowned. For the current him, the chaos god Thunder was troublesome to deal with, and it was clear that it was targeting Lin Yu. If he were to forcefully stop it, he might be forced to undergo the tribulation and face an even more terrifying heavenly tribulation. Furthermore, he was now inseparable from the primitive continent. When the time came, he might drag the entire primitive continent into destruction. The chaotic lightning was still gathering. However, at the moment when it was about to descend, Lin Yu abruptly opened his eyes. Dazzling light, like 2 peerless immortal swords, pierced through the universe. The divine lightning that was born in an unknown part of the primal chaos was actually being condensed at this moment. As time passed, it slowly turned into a speck of light. It was very weak, but no one dared to question its power. It exuded a mysterious aura. Following Lin Yu's soft cry, the object formed by the gathering of divine lightning slowly descended. Finally, it appeared in Lin Yu's sea of consciousness from between his eyebrows. Even the Vairocana Buddha Lord, who was standing guard beside Lin Yu, did not know what was going on. He wondered what Lin Yu had comprehended. However, when the object formed by the primal chaos divine lightning entered his sea of consciousness, he was able to clearly see it. It was a power that could threaten even divine kings, yet it was currently residing in an emperor realm cultivator's sea of consciousness. He did not know whether it was a good or bad thing. However, seeing that Lin Yu's aura was still very stable, the Vairocana Buddha Lord was temporarily relieved. Throughout the ages, countless geniuses had died prematurely in the process of breaking through to the saint realm. It did not matter how talented one was or how heaven-defying one's luck was. It was very likely that one would not be able to break through to the saint realm. The dangers involved were indescribable. Every cultivator who broke through to the saint realm would face different things. Only those who had broken through could understand the various mysteries involved. Therefore, there were no accurate records of what one would comprehend after breaking through to the saint realm in the ancient books. This was because every cultivator who broke through to the saint realm took a different path. 99% of the cultivators would die at this step. Beings who could reach the peak of the emperor realm were existences that could be counted on one hand in the 3 realms and 5 regions. In the process of breaking through to the saint realm, only 1 out of 100 people would succeed. This kind of probability and fortune was almost negligible to the crowd. This was also the reason why the Vairocana Buddha Lord was nervous. Although he knew that Lin Yu's state of mind, talent, and opportunities were all top-notch, breaking through to the saint realm meant that he had to abandon everything else. These things might be helpful, but most of them were just fleeting clouds. This was a hurdle that could only be overcome by oneself. No one else could help. Therefore, before entering seclusion, the Vairocana Buddha Lord had not warned Lin Yu about the things he needed to pay attention to in his cultivation. If he had told him about breaking through to the saint realm, it might have become a restriction that restricted Lin Yu's development. He knew that the end of Lin Yu's cultivation was definitely not the saint realm. It was the legendary supreme realm, the divine king realm. If he said too much, it would be like a piece of white paper that had been artificially dripped with ink. It might turn into a painting or a piece of calligraphy that had been handed down for generations. However, these things did not belong to him. If he wanted to go far on the path of cultivation, at Lin Yu's current level, he would have to develop his own things. The corners of Lin Yu's mouth curled up when he sensed the chaos lightning particles in his sea of consciousness. Although he didn't have a clear path for himself, he had a feeling that he had touched upon something in the midst of his enlightenment. However, he couldn't fully understand it at his current level. He saw something that was a level higher than the divine king realm. The chaos lightning particles were now like seeds that were imprinted in his sea of consciousness. They were only waiting for a moment to sprout. After doing all of this, Lin Yu didn't stop at all. During the process of enlightenment, the cultivation method in his body circulated on its own and refined part of the origin substance. Spring passed and autumn came. 3 years had passed. Lin Yu's cultivation had stopped at the peak of the emperor realm. The aura of returning to one's true self circulated around his body. He was like an ordinary person at the moment. Not a trace of his cultivation leaked out. Even the origin substance and the glorious chi had been retracted into the depths of his body. He was now at the most crucial step, breaking through to the saint realm. This required time to grind. A person who broke through to the saint realm would need tens of thousands of years in this state. The great Solar Buddha and the others knew that they didn't have much time left. As time passed, a layer of dust accumulated on Lin Yu's body. The leaves that fell on him last year had rotted and stuck to his clothes. In the Heavenly Alliance, the jade pure goddess sat in the small courtyard, her eyes as calm as water. Time was no longer important to Saint Realm experts like them. However, the entire Heavenly Alliance, and even the primitive continent, had an oppressive atmosphere. The Dark Divine Priest and the others were counting the years. At this moment, the woman in the treasure pavilion had passed through the gate and brought the Dark Divine Priest's remaining troops to the Heavenly Alliance. The woman in the treasure pavilion was the Dark Divine Priest's most valued disciple. She was already his personal disciple. She had been secretly nurtured and was now an Emperor Realm expert. However, she was now under the control of the Mastermind. The Mastermind's methods were mysterious and strange. The Great Solar Buddha didn't even notice when they entered the boundless sea. Chapter 11:18. The Heavenly Alliance was overjoyed at the arrival of the Dark Divine officials' remaining troops. Although there were not many of them had suffered because of the Dark Divine officials' misfortune. However, those who survived were the Dark Divine officials' trusted subordinates. They had been secretly nurtured, and their strength could not be underestimated. This was undoubtedly a good thing for the Heavenly Alliance. It would be a great help to Lin Yu's camp, especially Border C. They had suffered great losses in this battle. They would not be able to resist the Heavenly Alliance in the upcoming battle. Greetings, Dark Divine Official. The lady from the Treasure Map Pavilion was covered in wounds as she knelt before the Dark Divine Official. The people behind her knelt down as well. We are so happy to see that the Dark Divine Official is fine. These people had wounds on their bodies, but they could not hide the joy in their eyes. Many of them carried the corpses of their companions. It's good that you are here. The Dark Divine Official was gratified. However, when he saw the corpses they carried, he could not help but feel heavy-hearted. Obviously, they had suffered heavy losses when they fought their way out of the heavenly region. I will not let them die in vain. I will let the six-winged Divine King pay for their lives with his blood. The Dark Divine Official's eyes were filled with murderous intent and endless majesty. Bury them. Then, he instructed the lady from the Treasure Map Pavilion. Yes, they looked at the dead disciples with sorrow in their eyes. Many of the people who had died had chosen to cover the retreat of the disciples who were lucky enough to survive. However, the corpses they brought back were only a few. The corpses here were brought back after risking their lives. Most of them had already died in the battle, leaving not even their bones behind. The Dark Divine Official personally set up a cenotaph for them and led the crowd to pay their respects. On the way back to the Heavenly Alliance, the lady from the Treasure Map Pavilion asked, "We have not seen the young Divine King for a long time. We should pay our respects to him first." There is a problem with the young Divine King's cultivation. He is now in seclusion, the Dark Divine Official replied. It is enough for you to have such intentions. The lady from the Treasure Map Pavilion nodded. The young Divine King is a great friend. He saved the Dark Divine Official personally, and I met him once. At that time, the puppet seed planted in her body had yet to awaken and retained its own consciousness. He heard the Dark Priest mention that Lin Yu was in seclusion because of a problem with his cultivation. The expression of the woman from the treasure diagram pavilion changed imperceptibly. Then, she was extremely shocked. What happened to the young Divine King? It's nothing serious. You'll be able to see him soon. The Dark Priest replied. However, at this moment, even though he was looking at the woman with a calm expression, there was already doubt in his heart. Although he was the one who asked the woman to hide in the heaven domain and wait for the right time to gather his trusted subordinates. But coming back at this time was a little strange. After that, the Dark Priest paid more attention to the woman. Although she was the personal disciple of the Dark Divine Priest, she still had to be on her guard. Within the heaven domain, the Mastermind smiled. Did something really happen to that kid? This was because Lin Yu had imprisoned his remnant consciousness at the very first moment. The Mastermind behind the scenes didn't know that Lin Yu had already mastered the origin substance. This would be the most important trump card, and it would play a key role in the final battle. Therefore, Lin Yu and the others were very cautious. Only a few people like the Archaeosaurus knew about this. Lin Yu, who was in seclusion in the Mahavakana Buddha's secret ground, was still sitting there. Even his aura seemed to have dropped to an indiscernible level. Time passed. 10 years felt like a day. Lin Yu's body was now covered in dust. His figure was buried. At this moment, he was like a rock, without any movement. Even his body, including his sea of consciousness, was dim and lightless. At this moment, he seemed to have passed away. Only a black feather floated down from the sky and landed in his palm. Then, it turned into specks of light and entered Lin Yu's body. 12 years passed. At this moment, a flame suddenly lit up in Lin Yu's dead consciousness. Like the first ray of light at the birth of a universe, it appeared at the edge of the universe. At this moment, Lin Yu's consciousness returned. At this moment, Lin Yu suddenly opened his eyes. However, the scene before him had changed. He was standing on a piece of wasteland. There was no aura of life. There were no shadows of living beings. There was a deathly silence. The world was dark. Lin Yu knew that he was still on the primitive continent. However, the scene before him was very different. An endless desolation. The entire world was shrouded in a sorrowful aura. Lin Yu looked up into the sky. At the highest point of the sky, the sun was already broken. At this moment, it had sunk to the west of the continent. It was only emitting a weak glow. There were no other signs of life. This was also the reason why the world was so dark. Mahavarakana Buddha. Lin Yu could sense that the sun that the Mahavarakana Buddha had turned into was still without any aura. It had fallen completely. How long have I been in seclusion? Lin Yu frowned. He suddenly realized that he had been in seclusion all this while. Had he not awakened, even when the six-winged divine king had broken through? The world had changed. Lin Yu looked at his withered palms and his snow-white hair. Too much time had passed. Too much time had passed. Lin Yu had missed it in the end. He stopped where he was and saw a broken weapon stuck diagonally into the ground. The jade horn of the Archeasa rose, the claw of the sea god dragon, and the broken zither of the Yuching divine lady. At this moment, on the ground, a desolate wind blew past, sweeping up endless sand. In front of them was a stone tablet that was broken beyond recognition. Lin Yu approached it. There was a sense of sorrow in it. Young divine king, I won't be able to see the moment you wake up and return. I'll take my leave first. This was the message left behind by the dark divine priest. The words left on the stone tablet were written by the dark divine priest with his own sage realm blood essence. Even though time had passed, it could still be read. Although Lin Yu was old, the aura on his body did indeed cause the entire world to tremble with the changes in his emotions. This realm was obviously the divine king realm, but it was all too late. In order to break through, he gave up everything. Before the battle, he was sent to an unknown place by the Mahavarakana Buddha. Now, he had awakened and returned. The people of the 12 universes were plunged into misery and suffering. All his old friends had died in the final battle. With such an outcome, even if I break through to the divine king realm, what's the use? Lin Yu's old hand caressed the broken stone tablet. The world changed with his emotions, and the void was cracking inch by inch. He took out the Divine King's token, wanting to reverse time. But the moment the Divine King's token appeared in his hand, it turned into dust and dissipated with the wind. He had spent too much time cultivating and used all the power of time in the Divine King's token. Now, it was useless and had completely disappeared. Lin Yu looked at the remains of the Divine King's token in his hand, which was sliding down like dust. Is it really too late? Lin Yu's heart skipped a beat. He turned around and came to the place of Ksitigarbha. But hell was empty, and the yellow spring had dried up. Everything was gone. This is the end? Lin Yu murmured. Chapter 11:19. He came to the secret place of the great sun, boundless Buddha again. This was the place before he went into seclusion. Now it was unrecognizable and full of devastation. The white bones of the great sun, boundless Buddha, sat cross-legged on a stone, eerie and sorrowful. The white-haired Lin Yu sat cross-legged. With the exhaustion of the 12 universes, there was no concept of time here. Just like that, an unknown amount of time passed. The old Lin Yu suddenly opened his eyes. This is not the end. What I want is not the death of a beauty and the return of an old friend. How can I, Lin Yu, allow this to happen? Boom! The real Lin Yu also suddenly opened his eyes at this time. The dust covering his body fell one after another. His body emitted a mysterious aura. His cultivation base began to operate. His nirvana, divine consciousness, also recovered at this moment. The origin substance that had not been completely refined also appeared in his body once again. Lin Yu's body underwent a mysterious transformation. His entire body was like an eternal divine furnace, emitting an aura that made one's heart palpitate. What is Tao? Everyone has Tao in their heart. No matter how high or low the cultivation base is, persevering in one's heart is cultivating Tao. There are 3,000 great Taos, and I only follow my heart. Lin Yu's mind was clear at this time. The power in his body began to transform. His realm began to enter the sage realm under a clear perception. At this time, a strange phenomenon was born between heaven and earth. It was the sage realm breakthrough, the blessing from heaven and earth. Light rain sprinkled down, and one could see the scene of the fairy realm. But all of this, as Lin Yu stood up and waved his hand, all of this dissipated. No need for the blessing. My realm also does not need the recognition of heaven and earth. His words were domineering. Lin Yu stood in the light rain, untainted by a speck of dust, and even his hair became sparkling and translucent. 7 days passed in a row. Lin Yu stood here, his figure tall and straight, like a towering sacred mountain, until the strange phenomenon disappeared. His body emitted a power that made one's heart palpitate. The aura of the sage realm was completely revealed. It was to the extent that he had directly surpassed the half-saint level and reached a level that billions of living beings could not hope to reach. After so many years, another saint realm expert had been born in the 3 dimensions in 5 regions. The great solar, boundless Buddha Lord smiled. You've broken through. Thank you, Supreme Buddha, for protecting me. Lin Yu expressed his gratitude. I didn't help much. You relied entirely on yourself. The great solar, boundless Buddha spoke. How many years have passed? Lin Yu asked. As he cultivated, he forgot about the passage of time. At the same time, his divine sense went through that memory, and he didn't feel very good. 25 years. The great solar, boundless Buddha, God replied. It had only taken him 25 years to break through to the sage realm. Moreover, Lin Yu was still so young. Since ancient times, it was hard to find anyone who could match his speed of advancement. Since the birth of the 12 universes, such a character had never appeared. Lin Yu was the undisputed number 1. It had already surpassed his achievements in his previous life. 25 years. Lin Yu nodded. It was now less than 5 years away from the date that the great solar, boundless Buddha God had predicted. However, this was just a speculation. There were many variables that could be brought forward. Lin Yu and the others had to make preparations in advance. It's time for the final battle to begin. The great solar, boundless Buddha God sighed and looked at the sky. It had been too long since he had waited for this day. Time had passed. It was time to settle the old king of God's grudge. Lin Yu's eyes were deep as he nodded. Then, his figure disappeared from the secret place. Using falsified heaven, he appeared in the Heaven Alliance in the blink of an eye. He walked out of his secluded cultivation. The aura of the Saint Realm covered the entire Heaven Alliance. The aura of the Saint Realm. The Archaeosaurs and the others opened their eyes at the same time. They were the only saints in the entire Heaven Alliance. Now that another one had appeared, their expressions couldn't help but change greatly. Is the 6-winged divine king preparing for the final battle? The sea god dragon appeared. They were now in the main hall, talking to each other with solemn expressions. They emitted the aura of the Saint Realm, which made all the beings in the Heaven Alliance tremble in fear. Just as they were looking for the source of the Saint Realm aura with solemn expressions, a tall and straight figure slowly walked into the main hall. Young Divine King, Your Highness, Alliance Leader. They stared at the aura that Lin Yu was emitting. There was no doubt that he was in the Saint Realm. Your Highness, you've broken through to the Saint Realm. The dark divine priest and the others were all shocked. They knew that Lin Yu was in seclusion. According to their guess, Lin Yu was already considered a shocking and peerless talent to have reached the peak of the Emperor realm. However, he had broken through to the Saint realm in 25 years. He hadn't even settled in the pre-Saint realm. The Archaeosaurs and the others were in the Saint realm, so they knew how difficult it was to break through to this realm. However, Lin Yu had really reached the Saint realm. The Realm Sea Lord's mouth was dry. During this time, he had the Sea God Dragon's enlightenment and the coffin creature he'd obtained from the end of primordial chaos. That was how he'd managed to take a step into the Emperor realm. However, Lin Yu had broken through to this realm. How could this not be shocking? After the initial shock, Qin Wunyan and the others were overjoyed and immediately knelt on the ground. Congratulations, Alliance Leader. Congratulations, Alliance Leader. From the bottom of their hearts. Now that Lin Yu had broken through to the Saint Realm, he was one of the top fighters in the 3 realms and 5 regions. Except for the 6-winged Divine King and a few others. No one could threaten Lin Yu in the front anymore. Lin Yu's breakthrough was undoubtedly very exciting news for the entire camp. The eyes of the treasure map pavilion woman behind the dark divine priest changed inadvertently, a dark shadow flashing past. During this time, she'd always wanted to investigate Lin Yu's background. She'd even wanted to sneak into Lin Yu's seclusion grounds many times to completely eliminate him. However, the security there was too tight. The Archaeosaurs and the others had never left. Therefore, she could only settle for the next best thing, which was to set up a hidden trap in the entire Heaven Alliance. Congratulations, young Divine King, for breaking through to the next realm. The woman from the treasure map pavilion noticed Lin Yu's gaze and knelt on the ground to express her congratulations. Lin Yu looked at the woman calmly. There was a deep meaning in his gaze. This was because he sensed the aura of the extreme, evil origin from the woman. However, he didn't point it out immediately. She might still be useful if he kept her alive. The Archaeosaurs and the others were in the hall, their eyes filled with excitement. The day of the final battle had arrived. Get ready to rescue Sky Phoenix. Lin Yu only said this sentence faintly. However, the most troublesome thing was that they didn't know where Sky Phoenix was imprisoned. The Dark Divine Priest also expressed his doubts. Then let's attack the entire Heaven region. The Sea God Dragon's eyes were filled with battle intent. Realm Sea's powers in the battle 25 years ago, countless creatures were slaughtered, dying in that battle. The survivors of the Realm Sea had already endured the humiliation for a long time. Lin Yu nodded. This was the only way now. Chapter 1120. After a discussion, they began to prepare for the final battle. Some were excited, while others were worried. The higher-ups knew that this battle would be bloody and they would have to pile up corpses. However, there was no other way. Lin Yu stood in the middle of the battle and waited for everyone to leave. He asked the Darkness Priest to stay behind. Your Highness, why did you ask me to stay? Although the Darkness Priest already had a guess, he still asked. That trusted aid of yours is already under our control. Lin Yu said calmly. Although the Darkness Priest could not sense the aura of the abominable origin, he was meticulous and had a rough idea. However, this was his favorite disciple, so he still had hope. Should we kill him now? For the sake of the big picture, the Darkness Priest knew how to choose. He could not ruin his entire faction for one person. After all, she was hiding in the dark and might have set up many traps. Their plan would be known to the 6-winged Divine King and the others. This would undoubtedly put their faction in deep trouble. Even though he had a deep relationship with his personal disciple, he could not allow such a thing to happen. We can use him to send the wrong message to the 6-winged Divine King and the others. Lin Yu voiced his thoughts. What do you think? After all, this was the Darkness Priest's trusted subordinate. He should ask for his opinion. Of course, there's no problem. The Darkness Priest sighed softly. This was the best way. Lin Yu nodded. Then he asked the Darkness Priest to send a message that the attack on the Sky region would begin in 3 months. This news was naturally heard by the woman. Now, the 6-winged Divine King's faction also knew about this and began to prepare for the final battle. Now, the six-winged divine king could not leave and was in an unknown part of the chaos. Many small worlds had already been massacred. At this moment, the abominable origin on the six-winged divine king's body was extremely dense. The aura on his body was also emitting a heart-palpitating pressure that seemed to shatter the entire sky. It was filled with a destructive aura. The shattered small worlds were filled with the wails of living beings. The black soul flag behind the six-winged divine king was constantly absorbing the origin of living beings. After being refined by the abominable origin, it entered his body. He slowly opened his eyes. The current six-winged divine king was already infinitely close to becoming a divine king. It seemed like he could break through at any time. He was only a step away. The divine king realm is really something to be desired. After 3 million years, I have only reached this step. Although it was only a step away, to living beings, it was an absolute chasm. It was not something that could be broken through with the accumulation of time. If it weren't for the abominable origin, the six-winged God King definitely wouldn't have been able to reach this level. At this time, he received the news that Lin Yu and the others were going to attack the Heaven Realm, and he couldn't help but smile. Everything will come to an end. His majestic voice was like heavenly thunder that exploded in the sky. He waved his sleeve. Starting from his body, the black origin of utmost evil began to spread like a drop of ink on water. Soon, it covered a large area of the heaven domain. All of the cultivators and living beings within the black mist felt a deep sense of fear. This was because they could clearly sense that their life source was rapidly draining away. Under the terrifying, abominable origin of utmost evil, the loss of life was irreversible. At this time, the various temple heads of the heaven domain also made their move. They all radiated intense killing intent as the abominable origin of utmost evil radiated from their bodies. The day of the slaughter of all living beings had begun. Regardless of whether they were cultivators or mortals, no one was spared by the temple heads. They were all killed. Under the Thunder God's attack, the cities within a radius of 1,000 miles directly exploded. Everything returned to nothingness and disappeared in the annals of history. Some living beings knelt on the ground and wept in grief, their eyes filled with despair. The origin of the massacred beings turned into specks of light that slowly sank into the black mist in the sky. The six-winged God King stood at the highest point. At this time, inky black banners appeared in the sky of the 3 realms and 5 regions. Their auras reached tens of thousands of meters and blotted out the sky. As the banners appeared, the strange runes on them spread. The six-winged God King's faction stepped out from within. They were strengthened by the abominable origin of utmost evil, and their cultivation had become incomparably terrifying. There were even Saint Realm experts among them. Rumble. Mountains and rivers were crumbling. All traces of civilization were being destroyed. Imperishable factions were also completely destroyed by the Saints' attacks. Among them, the patriarchs chose to sacrifice themselves in an attempt to fight to the death. However, under the despairing gazes of the living beings, the saints disdained them and crushed them to dust. Their efforts had no effect at all. Who can save us? Both cultivators and ordinary beings knelt on the ground, their eyes filled with despair. The Heaven Domain's factions had far exceeded their imaginations. In the past 30,000 years, they'd accumulated an untold number of experts. This was definitely the greatest black calamity in the history of the 3 realms and 5 regions. No one was spared. The six-winged God King's figure stood tall and cold in the air, receiving the baptism of 30,000 origin of utmost evil. He planned for 1,000,000 years for this day. Now, as he watched the wails of tens of thousands of living beings, his expression was cold and emotionless. Six-winged, you'll die a horrible death. The factions that were on good terms with the Heaven Domain and had chosen to submit couldn't escape this calamity. Their patriarchs were cursing at the six-winged God King's figure in the air. However, as the origin of utmost evil formed an evil dragon in the sky, It devoured their patriarchs, not even leaving behind a corpse. In order to break through to the God King realm and lead the 12 universes to officially be on par with the other 11 universes, all of you must be sacrificed. Don't worry, I'll leave behind the seeds. After I break through, the world will be rejuvenated and living beings will reappear in the world. The majestic voice reverberated in the various regions. It was filled with indifference and certainty. We just want to live. What's wrong with that? The future of the 12 universes has nothing to do with us mortals. Some people were wailing. A little girl was crying, hugging the corpses of her parents and kneeling on the ruins. She was crying so hard that she almost fainted. These were the seeds that the six-winged God King had spoken of. Apart from the primitive continent, the entire 3 realms and 5 regions fell into darkness. Living beings were constantly being slaughtered by the Heaven Domain's factions, disappearing from the world. The origin of life was constantly being absorbed by the black sky, strengthening the six-winged God King's power. As expected, this is the only way to break through to the God King realm. The six-winged God King enjoyed the nourishment of the origin of life. With his talent, it was absolutely impossible for him to reach the God King realm. But now, he had the origin of extreme evil. He even thought that as long as he harvested living beings once every million years, the God King realm might not be his limit. At this moment, the mastermind behind the scenes also appeared. He was also surrounded by dense origin of extreme evil. At this moment, his aura was infinitely close to the God King realm. He also benefited from the chaos of darkness this time. He felt that the 12 universes' imprisonment on him was no longer as strong. On the six-winged God King's side, there would be 2 God King realm powerhouses. This was undoubtedly a situation that made people despair. The six-winged God King's aura that was about to break through to the God King realm enveloped the entire 3 realms and 5 regions. Is there really no one who can stop the six-winged God King? A legendary figure sat cross-legged on the ground. He was very calm in the face of death. However, there was great hatred in his heart. He could only watch as the living beings around him died and the land was destroyed. There was nothing he could do. He had once loved this world deeply, but everything seemed so powerless at that time. He himself was also slowly dissipating under the attacks of the Saint Realm powerhouses. Chapter 1121. The dark upheaval began. Lin Yu and the others looked at the scene reflected in the sky. Many people couldn't bear it and closed their eyes. This scene was too tragic. Some people stared so hard that their eyes almost popped out of their sockets. This was because their families and friends were still in other regions. Some people roared at the sky like crazy, wanting to rush to the heaven region and kill the initiator of the dark upheaval. In the first month of the dark upheaval, Lin Yu slowly walked out of the hall. He had now completely comprehended the 8 great void tribes. The aura on his body carried a hint of returning to simplicity. He came to the outside of the hall. Below, it was already crowded with people. Everyone's eyes were filled with hope. They clenched their fists, their eyes filled with hatred. The six-winged Divine King's actions were extremely tragic, and everyone despised him. Alliance leader, please lead us to the heaven region. Young Divine King, lead us to kill the enemy. Everyone's voices gathered together, resounding and sorrowful. The entire 12 cosmoses was now about to become a land of despair. The six-winged Divine King's forces had already turned out in full force and started endless killing to strengthen the dark upheaval origin. The six-winged Divine King's aura had already shrouded the entire 3 realms and 5 regions, and he was on the verge of a breakthrough. Lin Yu also knew that he couldn't delay any longer. Now, the entire 3 realms and 5 regions had become hell on earth. More than 50% of the living beings had already died. This scene was too similar to what Lin Yu had seen in his dream after he had broken through to the next realm. He wouldn't allow this to happen. Lin Yu looked at the Dark Priest beside him. The Dark Priest also understood at this time. He couldn't bear it and directly attacked, not allowing anyone to react. Disciple, go in peace. The Dark Priest raised his hand and directly killed the woman from the treasure map pavilion. The woman from the treasure map pavilion screamed miserably. At the last moment, she activated the means that she had secretly set up in the Heaven Alliance for so many years. The rich, dark, upheaval origin gushed out from the ground of the Heaven Alliance like a volcanic eruption. Even the sky was torn apart. The scene of the realm's sea could already be seen. An immeasurable amount of seawater fell from above. The apocalyptic scene shocked everyone. They could not believe that there was a traitor in the Sky Alliance. Moreover, it had been hidden for more than 10 years. Lin Yu looked at this scene and calmly raised his right arm. Endless origin matter shrouded this place. The great solar boundless Buddha, Venerable, also made his move, directly sealing the water of the realm's sea. The gap was blocked by his powerful means. The six-winged divine king murdered his loved ones and slaughtered tens of thousands of living beings. His crimes are too numerous to be recorded. Today, the divine king has appointed a successor, the young divine king, to carry on the old divine king's legacy and suppress the six-winged divine king. The dark priest stepped out. His majestic voice was amplified by his cultivation base. Fight, kill, for the sake of the dead. We will slaughter our way to the upper heaven region. Everyone cheered. All the combat powers of the Sky Alliance were gathered at this moment. Countless warships slowly rose into the air. Countless cultivators, regardless of whether they were weak or strong, released all of their cultivation base at this moment, looking at the passage to the realm sea. At this moment, at the edge of the primordial sea, the former Saint Gushu looked up at the sky. This is the final battle. I have nothing to worry about. Thanks to the old divine king's care, I should also do my part. As he spoke, his young body emitted a hazy radiance. The endless seawater contained the power of the former Holy Land. After tens of thousands of years of accumulation, it began to gather toward the Saint Gushu. His power was advancing at an unimaginable speed, breaking through again, and finally reached the Saint Realm. Then, he took a step forward and disappeared from this place. It was as if he had transcended heaven and earth. Finally, he appeared in the Sky Alliance. The aura of the Saint Realm was revealed. He wore a thick Taoist robe and wore square shoes, but no one found him funny. On the contrary, they all looked sideways. They were all wary of such a powerhouse who had suddenly appeared. Greetings, young divine king. The Saint Gushu half knelt on the ground. You're here too. Lin Yu nodded silently. This is the final battle. Perhaps this is the reason why the old divine king let me live in this world. His eyes were calm. He knew that this crusade against the heaven realm might lead to certain death, but he was not afraid at all. The Saint Realm powerhouse absolutely had absolute power on the battlefield. Lin Yu had now changed into a white robe. His black hair was loose, and his posture was tall and straight. Under the reflection of the darkness in the sky, he seemed to be detached from the world. Today, we will kill our way to the heaven realm. Lin Yu spoke slowly. It reached everyone's ears. Then, Lin Yu led the dark divine priest and the others forward. They passed through the passage below the boundless sea. The strongest battle force had gathered. The terrifying battle intent almost shattered the passage. Above the devastated realm's sea, a boundless and terrifying aura suddenly appeared. The darkness briefly dissipated. Several powerful Saint Realm powerhouses stood in front of the boundless warship. They looked at the heaven realm at the same time. Kill! A mighty voice sounded. The war drums beat. Everyone's eyes were filled with determination. The peerlessly beautiful jade, pure divine maiden, was currently aloof from the world, like a clear lotus above realm sea. It was very likely that he would not be able to return from this battle. But no one showed fear. Along the way, the heaven realm forces and the realm sea were directly wiped out. At this time, the six-winged divine king and the mastermind appeared in the city of divine kings. Hee, they're here. The mastermind laughed. At this time, under the baptism of the endless life source, he had completely broken the cage. Now, he had truly recovered to his peak. He had reached the divine king realm. The terrifying aura caused the void to crack inch by inch, forming thousands of cracks that could not be repaired for a long time. The six-winged divine king was now wrapped in a mysterious aura. This was a sign that he was about to break through to the divine king realm. That power that looked down on everything was involuntarily emitting from his body. It made the people guarding the city of divine kings tremble and kneel on the ground. My little brother, do you think you can contend against me with that little bit of power you have? The six-winged divine king's face was cold. He had waited for this day for too long. The six-winged divine king was very ambitious. To him, breaking through to the divine king realm was not the end. He needed to obtain the divine king token and step into a higher realm. Therefore, he did not hesitate to sacrifice and slaughter thousands. Just wait here for them to come. The six-winged divine king was calm. Lin Yu and the others first began to conquer the 5 regions. The rain deity and the others could not last even half a round. In the end, they all died in Lin Yu's hands. The six-winged divine king did not seem to care about the deaths of these people. To him, the more lives that died, the stronger the power of the abominable life source. The faster he broke through to the divine king realm. Lin Yu had broken through to the saint realm, and there was no one who could withstand his attacks. But how vast was the 3 realms and 5 regions? They fought along the way. Although the speed of clearing was very fast, it still took half a year. Among them, it was unknown how many people had died. The last region was almost completely slaughtered. The aura of life could no longer be sensed. From then on, it was reduced to a wasteland. The once bustling city had now been reduced to ruins. The dilapidated city walls were stained with blood. The long river that ran through this region had turned blood red. The waves surged and slammed against the high shore. Lin Yu and the others stood beside the long river. Many people here had wounds on their bodies. Many of the warships had been destroyed. Their gazes were fixed on the heaven region. That was where the final battle would take place. Lin Yu's eyes were deep. As he closed his eyes, the old divine king's power slowly merged into his body. Unparalleled power swept through the world. It caused the entire 3 realms and 5 regions to tremble. Rumble. All of the abominable life source was dispelled. Light once again shone on the devastated land. Those who were lucky enough to survive knelt on the ruins. Young divine king, kill all enemies. Return peace to the 3 realms and 5 regions. These were the voices of all living beings. At this moment, endless wish power gathered in the 3 realms and 5 regions. Finally, it slowly merged into the imperial sword in Lin Yu's right hand. Its grade also rose rapidly. Finally, with the aura of chaos, it became a divine king artifact. Chapter 1122. This was the realm of the wishes of all living beings. It allowed his emperor's sword to transcend, carrying a power that made one's heart palpitate. As the old divine king's power and his body completely merged, his sword directly cut off the realm sea. Time and space seemed to no longer exist. Lin Yu did not say a word from beginning to end. He took a step forward. After the 8 parts merged into one, his not heaven had reached an unimaginable realm. It was as if he could step into the river of time and make it disappear from the space. At this moment, Lin Yu was going to face the 6-winged divine king alone. He knew that the 6-winged divine king had broken through to the divine king realm. Together with the mastermind behind the scenes, there was only one who could restrain them. Only Lin Yu, who had temporarily grasped the old divine king's power, could. This was part of Lin Yu's plan with the Dark Priest and the others. Lin Yu wanted to restrain the top fighting power of the Qingyu realm. The Dark Priest and the others were responsible for rescuing Tianfeng. Only by completely activating the Divine King's token's inheritance would they have a chance of winning this final battle. But at this moment, in the sky, a huge face that was like a star suddenly appeared. Then, the entire realm sea was evaporating, emitting a thick black fog. Beneath the surface of the sea, 9 towering pillars rose up. Strange runes curled around them, and they were arranged in a strange manner. It directly trapped Lin Yu and the others inside. Hee hee, I knew you still had some tricks up your sleeve. Otherwise, why would you dare to attack the Qingyu realm? So it's the old divine king's power. The face in the sky carried a hoarse laugh. They had already held back. They had set up a formation here, trapping heaven and earth. I believe you can't maintain the old divine king's power for a long time. With the heaven-trapping formation here, even if you have the power of the divine king realm, you won't be able to break it in a short time. When your time is up, let's see what other tricks you have. This scene happened so suddenly that no one expected it. Lin Yu swung his sword. The power that should have been able to destroy heaven and earth hit the black light screen, but it only caused a slight ripple. Do you think you can keep me here like this? Lin Yu's expression was cold. The six-winged divine king had broken through to the most crucial step now. The mastermind behind the scenes could not free himself either. The entire realm sea was trapped under the 9 heaven-reaching giant pillars. The entire sea area was evaporated and the reefs were exposed. The scene of the seabed could be seen. Lin Yu no longer held back. The origin substance flowed around his body. His white clothes and white light made him look like an immortal, powerful, and otherworldly. Origin matter. At this moment, the expression of the mastermind behind the scenes in the sky changed abruptly. Who would have thought that you've actually mastered such a substance? The mastermind was in disbelief. Origin matter had an innate suppressive effect on the abominable origin. Now that Lin Yu had grasped it, it was a bad omen for the six-winged God King and the mastermind, who relied on the abominable origins to cultivate. This was because the remnant consciousness of the mastermind had been trapped by Lin Yu at the first instance. Furthermore, the Vairocana Venerate had made a move. Therefore, they did not know that Lin Yu possessed the origin substance. This also allowed Lin Yu to hide until now. But the current situation no longer allowed him to continue. The Emperor's sword in his hand was surrounded by the origin substance and augmented by wish power. The sword body became supreme and mysterious, as if it was the creation of the world. Around the sword body, a small world was formed. Then, under the use of the Great Void 8 divisions, the phantoms of the 8 divisions merged with Lin Yu's figure. This was an extremely powerful sword move. The entire world was trembling. The power of the Divine King realm had already exceeded everyone's imagination. This level, in the ancient history of the 12 universes, only one person was born, and that was the old Divine King who looked down on the world. At this moment, the legend reappeared, making everyone tremble. Lin Yu raised his hand, and the Emperor's sword shone with dense light. Qi, the immortal light, slashed directly on the array formation. The mastermind's expression changed, but he did not show panic. Do you think you can break the array formation with just this sword? Ridiculous. The mastermind said slowly. Under the sword, although cracks appeared on the array formation, under the replenishment of the origin of abomination, it was healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Lin Yu raised his hand, wanting to swing the sword again. But at this moment, above the city of divine kings, the mastermind's hand suddenly changed. The entire array formation was rotating. The boundless black fog directly shrouded Lin Yu and pulled him to an unknown place. Then, all the black fog gathered toward Lin Yu, finally forming a sphere and quickly collapsing. Lin Yu would not be able to escape in a short period of time. At this moment, the Dark Priest looked at the broken array formation. Everyone, follow me to stop it from recovering. The Archaeos arose, and others nodded at the same time. They all knew that Lin Yu's Divine King realm had a time limit. It could not be delayed for too long. They had to delay the time for the array formation to recover. As long as the mastermind did not come personally, the power of their sage realm still had a decisive effect. Humph! The figures of the Dark Priest and others appeared in front of the huge light screen. Their expressions changed. Their figures gradually became illusory. When they could be seen again, they had already appeared outside the array formation. And in the black fog in the sky, there was a strong spatial fluctuation. A few figures slowly walked out of it. They all exuded the aura of a sage realm. There were as many as 8 of them. Everyone's face was filled with worry. On their side, there were only the dark priest, the Archaeosaurus, the sea god dragon, the J-pure goddess, and the Gushu, saint who appeared later. Don't think that we are unprepared. The Archaeosaurus snorted coldly. His jade horn shone. A door appeared beside him, and 3 puppets slowly walked out. They all exuded the aura of a sage realm, and there was a strong origin substance. Obviously, these were the coffin creatures they had obtained from the end of the Hongmeng continent, after being baptized by Lin Yu's origin substance. Now, they had been refined into puppets. The puppets of the Dark Priest and the Jade Pure Goddess were also given to the Archaeosaurus. Now he had 3 puppets. Although they all exuded the aura of a sage realm, only one of them had the power of sage realm. The sea god, King, snorted coldly, and another sage realm puppet appeared. A sage realm puppet is really rare. The divine priest of light was also in the middle of the 8 saints. He had benefited greatly from the chaos of the darkness realm, and had directly broken through to the sage realm. However, they were not anxious, because they were only here to delay the sea god dragon and the other sages, so that they could not stop the array from recovering. The dark priest and the others frowned deeply. They naturally knew what the light divine priest and the others were thinking. But now, there was no other way. They could only fight. Roar. The sea god dragon's figure became 10 million feet long, and his eyes were like the sun and the moon as he looked forward sharply. Ancestor, you guys fight. Let me stop this. The master of the realm, Sea, stepped forward, exuding an awe-inspiring aura. A quasi-saint puppet appeared beside him. Then, he took a step forward and went to the edge of the light screen. One of the cracks here was actually more than 30,000 feet long. The cracks on the top and bottom were still connected and were healing at a very fast speed. The master of the realm, Sea's eyes showed determination. Chapter 11:23. He knew very well that this level of formation was not something he could stop. Even if he had a quasi-saint puppet now, he might not be able to return if he went up alone. However, in order to buy time for Lin Yu, he resolutely turned into a rainbow light and arrived in front of the formation. Other than Lin Yu and the Dark Priest, he was now the most powerful person. Now, only he had the qualifications to stand out. Venerable Wuya and the others all had sorrowful expressions. They knew that if the master of the Realm Sea went there, his body and soul might be destroyed. Realm Sea Master, wait for me. At this moment, Venerable Chaos Demon's body emitted a heart-palpitating power. Without hesitation, he followed behind the Realm Sea Master and rushed to the edge of the formation. The surviving Venerable Realm Sea Master saw Venerable Chaos Demon rush out. He did not hesitate. Old Chaos Demon, how can I let you steal the limelight? Venerable Wuya laughed. This was a hopeless situation. Now, the young Divine King was temporarily trapped. Even the Sage Realm experts were stalled. If they waited for Lin Yu to break free and then use that energy-consuming attack, they might not be able to resist the attacks of 2 Divine King Realm experts in the final battle. In the end, everything would become the dust of history. Some venerables were hostile to Lin Yu before, but Lin Yu did not hold back at all. When Realm C was in the most difficult situation, he chose to attack without holding back. This righteousness was worthy of their admiration. So what if they lost their lives? Master, Qini's face was tear-stained. She wanted to stop her master, Venerable Zixia, from going to die. My good disciple, live well. Venerable Zixia stepped out with a smile in her eyes. Now that tens of thousands of spirits had fallen, perhaps the people here were the only survivors in the entire 3 realms and 5 regions. But the 6-winged Divine King was about to break through. Lin Yu was tied up again. Being able to stall for a bit of time might have a decisive effect on the later battle. The Realm Sea Lord looked at the venerables who came with him and couldn't help but sigh. You shouldn't have come. How could the powers of my realm Sea be cowardly and cowardly? Venerable Wuya bellowed. His figure appeared extremely small in front of the huge crack in the formation. But in terms of aura, he looked down on the world. With a wave of his sleeve, boundless glory chi shot toward the crack. Seeing that, exalted chaos demon and the others no longer held back and directly unleashed their strongest abilities. However, the effect of this harvest was minuscule. A mantis trying to stop a chariot. The illusory face of the mastermind said disdainfully. Venerable Wuya and the others were corroded by the power of simulation. They were sent flying backwards, spitting out large mouthfuls of blood. His aura instantly became much weaker. After all, this formation was created by a divine king expert, mysterious and terrifying, even though it had already been destroyed by Lin Yu's Emperor's sword. However, Venerable Wuya and the others were too insignificant in front of this formation with their spirit king strength. They were like ants trying to compete with the bright moon. It was just the recoil, but it was enough to greatly injure their vitality. This was also because the quasi-saint puppet had blocked most of the power. Otherwise, they might have been destroyed in body and soul under this attack. The Realm Sea Lord was also retreating, a large amount of blood flowing from the corner of his mouth. It dyed his indigo blue robes red. There's no other way. A look of determination appeared in the Realm Sea Lord's eyes. He formed a blade with his palm and directly cut off his own wrist. The Emperor Realm Expert's vitality was constantly converging toward the quasi-saint puppet. He actually chose to sacrifice himself at this moment. After the quasi-saint puppet absorbed the Realm Sea Lord's essence blood, it seemed as if flesh and blood were growing out of its body. Not long after, bloody veins and muscles grew on the bones all over his body, although the skin didn't show any effect. At this moment, the quasi-saint puppet's strength was rising steadily. In the end, it actually seemed to break through to the saint realm. The puppet used its physical body to resist, blocking the crack that was about to close. Although this method was the most foolish, it was the most effective one in the current situation. Venerable Chaos Demon laughed loudly. Old thief Wuya, this time, you can't compare to this old man. He pushed away Venerable Wuya, who was about to sacrifice himself. Then, the essence blood all over his body burned and directly disintegrated under the sky curtain. Endless vitality gathered toward the quasi-saint puppet. The quasi-saint puppet that was originally on the verge of breaking was now being replenished by the vitality and slowly recovered. At this moment, the quasi-saint puppet was like an iron wall, firmly blocking the formation's recovery. However, it still couldn't hold on for too long. In the end, the Realm Sea Lord also chose to sacrifice himself. Before his death, his aura was awe-inspiring. He turned his head. After I leave, the position of Realm Sea Lord will be handed over to you, Venerable Wuya. After saying this, he looked toward the crack, and his figure gradually became illusory. An endless amount of profound chi entered the quasi-saint puppet. May the Realm Sea Lord live forever. Venerable Chaos Demon, rest in peace. At this time, everyone who was trapped had sorrowful expressions. The disciples of Chaos Demon Sea region were kneeling on the ground, their heads heavily kowtowing. Facing the great calamity of the world, there was no more scheming. Now, their wills were as strong as an impregnable fortress. They were united as one, and that was to kill their way up to the heaven region, overthrow the six-winged divine king, and return peace to the 3 realms and 5 regions. Under this belief, everyone forcefully endured, even though they knew that there might not be any results. However, at this time, no one felt fear or dread. Although the sacrifice of exalted Chaos Demon and the Realm Sea Master caused them to feel great sorrow, this righteousness deeply motivated them. They would definitely win this battle. At this time, endless sword energy swept out. Lin Yu's tall and straight figure appeared in the world once more. He sensed that the auras of the Realm Sea Lord and Venerable Chaos Demon had already completely dissipated, no longer existing in the world. Lin Yu's deep eyes looked forward. He already understood everything. He didn't say a word, because he knew that in the current situation, he had to let the six-winged divine king cleanse the world with blood. He took a step forward. Sword light blazed and directly cut open the array formation. The array formation that made the realm Sea Lord and the others helpless was completely destroyed by Lin Yu's casual attack. This had an inseparable relationship with the sacrifice of the realm's Sea Lord and the others. If the array formation was really completely healed, it would be much more troublesome. Lin Yu took 2 stars from the sky and refined them in his hands, turning them into 2 tombstones. The names, Realm Sea Master and Chaos Demon Venerable, were engraved on them. Everyone bowed deeply to the tombstone that was refined from stars. Finally, Lin Yu looked ahead at the Dark Priest and the others who were fighting. Another sword slashed out. Everything happened too quickly. The Jade Pure Divine Maiden's enemy almost didn't have time to react before he was killed. The 9 heavens tribulation resounded throughout the world. It directly destroyed the mind and soul of the Saint Realm expert who was about to condense. The expressions of the other Saint Realm experts under the 6-winged Divine King changed at this time. Retreat quickly. A portal appeared in the sky. It instantly enveloped them. But before they could be teleported away, Lin Yu's sword slashed the portal into pieces and turned it into nothingness. I know that you are just cannon fodder sent by the 6-winged Divine King. If the power of the Saint Realm is absorbed, it should be a great supplement. Lin Yu said coldly. These Saint Realm experts were specially ordered by the 6-winged Divine King to die. Now, there were only 7 Saint Realm cultivators left. If all their origins were absorbed by the abominable origin, there was no doubt that the 6-winged Divine King would really break through. Lin Yu's expression didn't change. He swung his sword again. Under the power of the Divine King, everything was like an ant. The light Divine Priest and the others' expressions changed drastically. However, this space had been completely locked down. Chapter 1124. No matter how powerful one was, it would be difficult to escape. The hands of these Saint Realm experts were all stained with blood. They were the masterminds behind the dark turmoil that destroyed one domain after another. They were ruthless in the face of all living beings. At this moment, they were finally going to taste the evil consequences. A look of fear appeared on their faces. This was the instinct of living beings. The Divine King realm had already transcended. No one could resist. In the end, the few of them returned to dust. Their bodies and souls turned into nothingness under the sword. However, the origin matter they left behind began to sink into the black curtain condensed by the abominable origin above them uncontrollably. Lin Yu raised his left palm indifferently. Devouring the starry sky was activated. With the support of the origin matter, he forcefully plundered the abominable origin of several Saint Realm experts. After all, it wasn't the 6-winged Divine King or the Mastermind who came personally. Although the abominable origin above them was dense, it was difficult for it to have any significant effect in the hands of Lin Yu, who was already in the Divine King realm. The battle had already ended. Lin Yu's gaze directly pierced through the black fog above. You guys go and save Tianfeng. Lin Yu only said one sentence indifferently. Following that, a dazzling golden path formed beneath his feet. It pierced through time and space. As he took a step forward, he crossed the domain. The Dark Priest and the others were all surprised by this power. The young Divine King really has the demeanor of the old Divine King. The Dark Priest and the others sighed. However, it didn't stop at all. They directly passed through the formation and crossed the domain gate. After a few months of battle, they had finally arrived at the heavenly domain. Kill. They didn't know the exact location of Tianfeng's imprisonment. They could only fight and search along the way. Now, more than 80% of the top combat strength of the heavenly domain had died under the forces led by Lin Yu. This included the temple masters of these great temples. They had all been killed. Now, the Dark Priest and the others stepped onto the land of the heavenly domain. It was as if they had entered an uninhabited land and pushed forward. However, with the vastness of the heavenly domain, it would take a lot of time to search. This was a huge challenge for Lin Yu. At this moment, Lin Yu, who had appeared in the city of divine kings, walked down the golden path with the emperor's sword in his hand. He was as calm as an ancient well. The heaven region outside the city of divine kings was already in ruins. It was no longer as prosperous as before. White bones littered the ground, blood flowed like rivers, and a chilly wind wreaked havoc. Rumble. At this moment, the six-winged God King, who was sitting cross-legged in the sky above the city of God Kings, unleashed the origin of extreme evil. It was like a black sun with strange runes intertwining on its surface. The 6 wings that grew out of his body were also engraved with these runes. They were strange and unfathomable, and quickly crawled all over his body, even his face. It looked very intimidating. Although the 6-winged godly king's body was still stalwart, his pale face and the black runes made him look sinister and strange. But that powerful force was still sweeping through. The 6-winged God King had finally broken through to the God King realm through the sacrifice of 10,000 souls. That powerful force shook the heavens and the earth. The 6-winged godly king stood up. Both he and the mastermind wore strange smiles on their faces. The origin of extreme evil that filled the sky completely drowned the place. It isolated this place from the rest of the world. It was as if the concept of time and space no longer existed. Lin Yu's figure was like a speck of dust within it, appearing so small and powerless. This was a fated battle. Lin Yu looked at the 2 people in front of him. His eyes were calm from beginning to end. Even in the face of the 6-winged godly king's breakthrough, there was no change in his expression. My younger brother, back then when father took you away, he planned for millions of years. From the looks of it now, it was all in vain. The 6-winged godly king laughed. Under the boundless origin of extreme evil, he was the ruler. Everyone's life was at his mercy in this space. You are not worthy of mentioning father, Lin Yu only said indifferently. This caused the 6-winged godly king's body to tremble. Millions of years had passed, and he had always held a grudge, even though he had broken through to the God King realm now. But his jealousy towards Lin Yu still did not decrease at all. 6-winged godly king, don't talk nonsense with him. No need to waste time anymore. The mastermind spoke slowly, and right at this moment, the 6-winged godly king was suddenly pierced by a long sword from behind. Black blood flowed. It was very hard to imagine just what else could injure the present 6-winged godly king. The 6-winged godly king looked behind in disbelief. It was none other than the Lin Xiu, who had already betrayed him. The white-haired Lin Xiu was expressionless at this time. Do you think that in order to surpass Lin Yu, I need to rely on the enemy to obtain strength? Lin Xiu was expressionless and very cold. He had been enduring silently. Even when the darkness was in turmoil, he did not make a move against the 6-winged godly king. He had been waiting for this opportunity. My body is in the darkness, but my heart is in the light. Lin Xiu spoke. He possessed Lin Yu's talent. These few decades, he had been comprehending the origin of extreme evil. At this time, in his hand was a long sword refined from the origin of extreme evil. It possessed a boundless, strange aura, but it was different from what the 6-winged godly king and the rest comprehended. If Lin Xiu was given time, he might really be able to walk out a path of his own. A cold light flashed across the 6-winged godly king's eyes, carrying thick killing intent. He did not expect that he would be injured by a Sage Realm cultivator just after breaking through to the Godly King realm. But Lin Xiu ultimately underestimated Godly King realm cultivators. It was only to see the 6 black wings behind the 6-winged Godly King were akin to 6 great worlds, directly piercing through Lin Xiu at a bizarre speed. Lin Xiu, who was behind, did not move at all. But after the 6 wings pierced through him, his figure gradually became illusory. This was not a corporeal body, and at this time, in the black fog in front of the 6-winged Godly King, Another sword pierced out, injuring him once more. "I'm going to make you die." The six-winged, godly king was enraged. He sensed that these two swords injured his source. It made the godly king realm that he had just broken through to faintly show signs of instability. It was very hard to imagine that all of this was done by Lin Xiao, who had just broken through to the sage realm not long ago. At this time, Lin Yu also furrowed his brows slightly. With his present godly king realm, he seemed to have already seen through something. The present Lin Xiao already seemed to be no longer a living being, but already took the initiative to transform into a part of the abominable source. Hence, he did not have a corporeal body. He took the initiative to abandon his life in order to buy time for Lin Yu in this final battle. The time that the mastermind behind the scenes had grasped the abominable source far surpassed the six-winged godly king. When Lin Xiao attacked the second time, he already sensed it. It was only to see him reach out a withered palm, directly grabbing Lin Xiao out of the abominable source. Lin Xiao. Originally, Lin Xiao, who succeeded in the second attack, completely had the chance to escape, but he did not choose to do so. "My hands have long been stained with the blood of all living beings in the dark turmoil. Dying now is the best ending." Lin Xiao was very calm. He maintained indifference from beginning to end. In order to obtain the six-winged godly king's complete trust, he also participated in the dark turmoil and slaughtered who knew how many living beings. His hands were full of evil, and his current ending could be considered redemption. After all, he had crossed the heavenly chasm and injured the source of the godly king realm with his sage realm cultivation. The mastermind behind the scenes had a cold expression. They did not expect that in the end, they would be tricked by the ant in their eyes, as Lin Xiao's true spirit dissipated. In the space where the abominable source gathered, a divine consciousness suddenly appeared and entered Lin Yu's sea of consciousness. And this was the intelligence that Lin Xiao had obtained in the past few decades, the location of Sky Phoenix's imprisonment. Lin Yu looked at the scattered Lin Xiao's true spirit with a trace of pity in his eyes. But this emotion was quickly concealed by him. He waved his left hand and directly penetrated the space formed by the abominable source, directly transmitting the information of Sky Phoenix's imprisonment location to the Dark Priest and the others. Chapter 1125. The six-winged Divine King duo had cold expressions. Clearly, this result was very surprising to them. They didn't expect such an unforeseen event to happen. "Fight!" Lin Yu only spat out one word indifferently. Following that, the aura all over his body became incomparably blazing, like a great sun, scattering all the extreme evil source energy here. The origin energy surrounded him. It turned the 10 miles around Lin Yu into a pure land. All the strange substances couldn't pose the slightest threat to him. Although the six-winged Divine King's realm stopped at the God King realm, it was somewhat erratic. This kind of unforeseen event was undoubtedly fatal. The current Lin Yu had the old God King's strength. One had to know that the old God King's realm made the masterminds from other universes very wary. Hence, millions of years ago, they instigated the six-winged Divine King to secretly harm him and succeeded. Now they were fighting head-on. Although Lin Yu only had 50% of the old God King's strength in the past. However, the mastermind behind the scenes was still somewhat fearful. But now, there was no other way except to attack. Two God King realm powerhouses couldn't restrain one person. This was undoubtedly a fantasy. It was unbelievable. Moreover, Lin Yu was only borrowing power. His control of the God King realm was far inferior to theirs. Do you think that this ant can change the situation of the battle? The mastermind sneered. He made his move. In his hand was a scarlet spear. It was ancient and vicissitudes of life, as if it was born before the birth of the universe, filled with killing intent. As the spear appeared, the void was being destroyed inch by inch. It was as if there were worlds collapsing on the spear body, and the wails of all living beings could be heard. Clearly, during the chaos of the darkness, This spear had also been refined by the mastermind. At this moment, it carried the living beings of various worlds. Frog at the bottom of a well, you will never know how strong the foundation of the 10th universe where I am from is. Now, the mastermind behind the scenes was no longer concealed. He revealed his true origin, the 10th universe. Lin Yu faced the words of the mastermind. His expression was still indifferent. I'll kill you first, then destroy Universe 10. Lin Yu said slowly. There was no doubt in his tone. Do you know how many powerhouses there are in my 10th universe? It's far from your 12th universe, where even a godly king is hard to be born. The mastermind no longer held back. At this moment, he said that he was not the only god king in the universe he was in. As for him, he wasn't the strongest. He had come here under orders to obtain something from the 12 universes. If Lin Yu's guess was correct, back then, the old god king's breakthrough did not rely on external items. He was much stronger than a mastermind. He was also someone who had a high chance of breaking through to the divine king realm. This also made the ruler of the 10th universe worried. So he sent the mastermind behind the scenes to disrupt the old king of God's breakthrough. This was all a setup. As for Universe 10, it had come here to nurture the abominable origin, and at the same time, to take the 12 universes under its command. Now that Lin Yu had grasped the power of the divine king realm, he was much clearer about everything. You can rest in peace and return to the dust of history. The mastermind said slowly, without the slightest emotion. Back then, the old god king did have some means to take you away, and with the help of that artifact, he honed you into an unexpected figure. However, what the old god king didn't expect was that my master had interfered with time and stirred up time. The mastermind said, with a mocking look in his eyes, because of his master, time was interfered with. Therefore, the six-winged god king's breakthrough was brought forward by tens of thousands of years. Otherwise, with Lin Yu's recovery from reincarnation, he might be able to cultivate to the god king realm in tens of thousands of years. Moreover, with the inheritance of the god king's order, he and the six-winged god king might not be able to keep him in check. But now, everything was a foregone conclusion. Lin Yu's current true strength was only in the saint realm. Moreover, Sky Phoenix had not been rescued. Naturally, he could not fully grasp the inheritance of the God King's order. Lin Yu did not speak. He just slashed out with his sword. His Emperor's sword had been strengthened by the power of will of all spirits. It was a true God King weapon. Now, even in the face of the ancient spear, it was not at a disadvantage. They were evenly matched. After adjusting his breath, the six-winged God King also moved. He opened his mouth and shouted. In the 12 universes, the banners that were once controlled by him pierced through the void. They appeared in his hand. The 300 banners were slowly fused together. The tragic state of all living things was engraved on them. It was a hellish scene, another godly king weapon. The six-winged God King used the sacrifice of all spirits and at the same time used the power of will of all spirits to refine a God King weapon. It had boundless power. As the banners finished condensing, the banners fluttered. The entire sky was like a broken wall that was constantly collapsing. Endless resentful spirits crawled out from the void. There were mountains of corpses and seas of blood. There were skeletons floating. In an instant, Lin Yu was enveloped. Among them, resentful spirits were constantly climbing onto Lin Yu's body. It was as if they wanted to pull him into the sea of blood below and become one of them. Lin Yu's expression did not change. Even in the face of two experts of the same level, he still appeared very calm. This was the temperament that had been tempered by 100,000 years of reincarnation. In Lin Yu's left hand, the God King's token appeared. Previously, the God King's token had always considered itself a system. Now, it had turned into a material artifact. At this moment, it was summoned by Lin Yu. He held the Emperor's sword in one hand and the God King's token in the other. It carried a fighting spirit that looked down on the world. The origin of the God King's token was very mysterious. In terms of strength, it was definitely comparable to a God King weapon. At this moment, Lin Yu seemed to have two God King weapons in his hands, under the support of the old God King's power. It directly pierced through the space formed by the power of will of all spirits. The three of them used their strongest techniques, but it was not their true power. Not long after, Lin Yu was stained with blood. His chest was almost pierced through, but under the reversal of time and space by the God King's token, his injuries were quickly healed. It was equivalent to gambling with one's life. Lin Yu risked serious injuries and did not care about the spear piercing through him. He slashed out with his sword and almost cut the mastermind in half. This was definitely the most difficult and tragic battle in Lin Yu's history. The God King's essence blood scattered on the ground of the heaven region, corroding everything and turning it into nothingness. The three of them fought from the sky to the ground. They pierced through the heaven region. Lin Yu was suppressed again and again. Although he had the support of the God King's token, his injuries were instantly healed. But in the long run, the consumption on him was also extremely huge. He had already sensed that the power left by the old God King in his body was fading further. The six-winged God King and the others naturally sensed it too. At this moment, there was a smile in their eyes. The six-winged God King looked at the God King's token. In his heart, it was something that should belong to him. To avoid any accidents, you go and kill those remnants first. I'll hold them back here. The six-winged God King looked at Lin Yu indifferently. Under the repeated attacks, he could clearly sense that the God King's power in Lin Yu's body was getting weaker and weaker. Now, he could hold him back alone. As long as the mastermind killed the Dark Priest and the others who were still rescuing Sky Phoenix and cut off Lin Yu's chance of inheriting the complete God King's inheritance, everything would be settled. Want to leave? Lin Yu broke the six-winged God King's attack. There were some scarlet spots on his white clothes. He wiped away the blood at the corner of his mouth indifferently. His eyes were bright as he looked at the two of them. The earth-shattering battle began again. It was only at this moment that the six-winged God King and the others started to feel anxious. Because the longer this dragged on, the more likely it was for Sky Phoenix to escape. By then, things would become troublesome. Kill Lin Yu first. The mastermind said, as long as they killed Lin Yu, no one would inherit the God King's inheritance. By then, everything would be empty talk. Chapter 11:26. Both of them no longer held back and began to use their strongest moves. The heaven domain was pierced through at this moment. The great sun, boundless Buddha, who was in the primitive continent, was very worried about Lin Yu's situation. After all, the power of the God King realm he had was not complete. He only had the power of the God King realm and had no control over some of the laws. If this continued, he might really die in this battle. The great sun, boundless Buddha sighed. He had already seen Lin Yu spilling blood through the sky. Scarlet blood dyed the ground of the heaven domain crimson. It was very tragic. Lin Yu also used all his strength at this moment. The Emperor's sword in his hand and the God King token shook together. At this moment, an unimaginable power erupted. It directly sent the six-winged Divine King and the Mastermind flying. At this moment, Lin Yu's power began to dim. But the six-winged Divine King and the Mastermind were not happy at this moment, because they realized that Lin Xiao, who had been hiding for the past few decades, had secretly set up too many tricks. Even the place where the Heavenly Phoenix was imprisoned had a problem. There was an array set up by the abominable source. 90% of the Heaven Domain forces guarding there were killed. Among them, many saints had suffered. The Dark Priest and the others were bathed in blood. Under the guidance of Lin Xiao's last divine thought, they advanced. But the six-winged Divine King's forces, after millions of years of accumulation and development, were simply too terrifying. Even though 7 Sage Realm cultivators had been killed, there were still no less than 5 Sage Realm cultivators alive. And now that the Heaven Domain was filled with the abominable source, it was simply unimaginable for the saints of the Heaven Domain forces. The Archaeosaurus, Sea God Dragon, and the others were really angry. Their saint aura was vast and mighty. The entire battlefield was filled with corpses piled up like a towering mountain. Among them were Lin Yu's camp and the six-winged Divine King's forces. And at the front was the Dark Priest and the others. Even the peerless goddess Yu Qing's spotless white clothes were stained with red blood. Some of it was the enemy's, and some of it was her own. They were now using their strongest techniques, not hesitating to consume their own origins. The battle between Divine Kings was too vast. Even though they were tens of thousands of miles away, they were still affected by the aftershocks. They had already sensed that Lin Yu was at a disadvantage, but the resistance here was too stubborn. Furthermore, the people from the Six-Winged God King's faction were clearly only guarding this place under orders to stall for time. The battle was in a stalemate. The Dark Priest didn't hesitate to use forbidden methods many times, but he still couldn't completely turn the situation around. The light of a grain of rice wants to compete with the brilliance of the moon. Now that the era of the Six-Winged Divine King's domination has arrived, all of you will be buried as corpses. The few Saint Realm experts in the array mocked him. In a direct confrontation, without the support of the origin of abomination, they were no match for the Dark Priest. This was because with their talent and strength, they would never be able to reach the Saint Realm in terms of cultivation. Their breakthroughs were only possible with the help of the abominable essence. The two Saint Realm experts had already died to the Jade Pure Goddess 9 Heaven Tribulation song. While they were terrified, they also began to retreat. This was because all the Saint Realm experts here could sense that Lin Yu was already at a disadvantage in the battle between Divine Kings. Moreover, his aura was getting weaker and weaker. It seemed that he could die at any time. This undoubtedly made the Dark Priest, who was usually calm, gradually become anxious. He would never allow Lin Yu to die like this. I am indebted to the old Divine King's kindness and have endured for millions of years. Now that the young Divine King has grown to such a level, I can only watch everything turn to ashes. As he spoke, the Dark Priest took a step forward. His body immediately erupted with terrifying demonic energy. At this moment, he didn't hesitate to exhaust his origin to break this array. Demonic energy spread for 80,000 miles. The Dark Priest's eyes were filled with determination. His imposing figure was reflected in the sky. He used the most powerful forbidden method in his life. The heavenly demon descends. The light screen formed by the origin of abomination in the sky was penetrated. Everyone looked at the scene in the sky and couldn't help but gasp. The Dark Priest's figure appeared in the sky and merged with the 10,000-foot-tall shadow in the demonic energy. At this moment, he had burned up his origin. The most powerful attack of his life was gathering. Dark Priest. The Archaeosaurus looked at the forehead of the 10,000-foot-tall shadow in the sky. The Dark Priest's face was pale, and his essence, chi, and spirit were extremely weak. His conflagration of divine knowledge was gradually weakening. Break for me. The Dark God King looked at the array. The shadow clenched his fist and gathered all his strength into this punch. It was earth-shattering and tore the void apart. One could see that the space here was constantly shattering. Rumble. With the array as the center, the ground formed endless canyons. Earth and rocks kept rolling down. Who dares disturb my sleep? At this moment, a leisurely voice came from the array. Then there was the sound of chains being dragged. Blazing 5-colored flames rushed into the sky. In the sky, the silhouette of a phoenix was formed. That terrifying aura made everyone feel immense pressure. Especially Archaeosaurus, the sea god dragon, and the demon empress Platycodon grandiflorum and other demon bloodlines. At this moment, they felt it the most. The first on the demon god list, the person who could fight the six-winged divine king without fear. Now he had recovered, and after millions of years, his strength didn't diminish at all. In fact, Archaeosaurus and the others even sensed a supreme aura from him. It was the power of a divine king. Heavenly Phoenix. Archaeosaurus and the others were pleasantly surprised. What they didn't expect was that the Heavenly Phoenix had been hibernating for millions of years. Now, he sensed the arrival of the final battle. He didn't hide his aura anymore. The half-step divine king realm was fully revealed. The five-color divine fire smelted the sky. Under the dark priest's strongest attack, the two worked together. It directly pierced through the array. The remaining sage realm experts of the Qingyun realm forces. Faced with this unforeseen event, they didn't expect it. What they didn't expect was that the heavenly phoenix, whose origin had been extracted by the six-winged divine king, was almost dead. They didn't expect him to be even stronger now. This exceeded everyone's imagination. In these millions of years, the heavenly phoenix had been suffering endless torture. His body had been corroded by the evil origin many times. But even the six-winged divine king and the others had underestimated the heavenly phoenix's talent. Now, the heavenly phoenix had been completely reborn from the flames. She had even reached a higher level of attainment. The array was destroyed. The five-color divine fire was still blazing, turning this place into a world of divine fire. It was as if the only cluster of fire at the beginning of the world had grown stronger, and the divine gold chains that bound the heavenly phoenix were also quickly melted under the burning of the five-color divine fire. Screech! A loud and clear phoenix cry spread throughout the entire Qingyun realm. After being suppressed for hundreds of years, the first on the demon god list, the heavenly phoenix, was completely reborn. The divine fire shone on the ground, dispelling the darkness. The dark priest also lost all his strength at this time. He fell straight to the ground and was caught by the Archaeosaurus and the others. At this time, the dark priest was like an old man at the end of his life. His sage realm cultivation had completely dissipated under this attack. He had sacrificed all his origin. If the heavenly phoenix hadn't recovered in time, it was very likely that his body and soul would have been destroyed. Thank you. The heavenly phoenix looked at the dark priest. There was a trace of gratitude in his proud eyes. Then, a wisp of the heavenly phoenix's origin entered the dark priest's body, temporarily saving his life. The heavenly phoenix stood in the air. The five-color divine fire lingered around his body, melting the void. The scorching temperature caused the space to distort. Chapter 11:27. Sky Phoenix frowned as he looked at the devastated land. He could hardly sense any living beings in the 3 realms and 5 regions. There was pity in his cold eyes. Now that he had become a half-step divine king, his state of mind was naturally different. The final battle has begun. Where is the young divine king now? Sky Phoenix looked at the people below. Back then the Archaeosaurus, the sea god dragon, and the others were prepared to end everything in that era. But they were carelessly harmed by the 6-winged divine king scheme. They were defeated one by one. The Archaeosaurus disappeared with serious injuries. The sea god dragon hibernated in the realm sea, and Sky Phoenix fought the 6-winged divine king in the realm domain with unyielding pride. If the mastermind hadn't intervened in the end, Sky Phoenix wouldn't have lost that battle. Then, Sky Phoenix sensed the auras of 3 divine kings in the realm domain, and his expression changed. Now Her Highness is fighting the 6-winged divine king. The Jade Pure Goddess stood out. That little girl back then? I didn't expect her to break through to the Saint Realm now. Sky Phoenix looked into the distance. In today's battle, I will kill the 6-winged divine king. Sky Phoenix said slowly. He turned into a stream of light. Like a primitive meteorite, he rushed toward the battlefield at a speed faster than anything else. At this moment, the voice of the Vairocana Buddha sounded in Sky Phoenix's heart. Then, an aura of the origin came from the incipient extent and merged with Sky Phoenix. Sky Phoenix's strength skyrocketed again. He merged with the Vairocana Buddha's Tao law. At this moment, a great sun appeared in the blazing 5-color divine fire. Golden patterns intertwined on his body. Now he was infinitely close to the divine king realm. He seemed to be only a step away. The Vairocana Buddha could have reached the divine king realm by himself, but he gave up because he pitted the world. But his understanding of the Tao was the most profound in the 12 universes. Although he was still a half-step divine king, his consciousness and Tao law had definitely reached the divine king realm. At this moment, he gave all his Tao law to the awakened sky phoenix. And because of this, he fell into a deep sleep. I'll leave the rest to you. The majestic voice of the boundless great solar Buddha, venerate, sounded a little weak. The sun in the primitive continent grew dimmer and dimmer. Finally, the periphery of the light formed a black ring. The world could no longer sense the aura of the boundless Vairocana Buddha. As a divine king, Lin Yu's perception of the heaven and earth was extremely sharp. Supreme Buddha. This was the first time Lin Yu's emotions had changed in battle. To him, the Vairocana boundless Buddha was both a teacher and a friend. But now, because of the overall situation of the world, the aura had completely disappeared. At the same time, the two of them sensed another existence that was extremely close to God King rapidly approach the battlefield. This could not help but cause their emotions to change. Sky Phoenix. Disbelief was written all over the six-winged God King's face. When he broke through to God King, he had forcibly extracted the heavenly phoenix's origin energy with the help of the abominable origin energy. The six-winged God King had already predicted this battle. He had expected that even if the heavenly phoenix did not die and was rescued, she would only be a cripple. You also did not expect that I would rise again after breaking down and improve my strength further. The heavenly phoenix carried an endless amount of divine fire and separated the battlefield. Lin Yu stood side by side with the heavenly phoenix. Although he was bathed in blood, his eyes were still burning brightly. However, his God King strength had become extremely weak, and it seemed like it could fall at any time. The heavenly phoenix is late. I hope you can forgive me. The heavenly phoenix turned around and looked at Lin Yu. Just nice. Lin Yu forced a smile. As the heavenly phoenix flapped its wings, a stream of divine fire was injected into the divine king's token. The divine king's token floated up. This was the test of the heavenly phoenix, and it was taking effect. As long as he passed this test, Lin Yu would be able to completely grasp the inheritance of the old divine king, the ruler of the 12 universes in the past. Even after countless years had passed, it was still enough to make one tremble in fear. The six-winged God King's eyes were cold. This belongs to me. As he spoke, his fist turned into a claw. The extreme evil origin was vast and mighty, turning into a huge hand that enveloped the entire region. It grabbed at Lin Yu. He must not be allowed to receive the complete inheritance of the divine king. At this moment, the mastermind gradually revealed an anxious look. In the battle earlier, although they had a crushing advantage, Lin Yu's combat strength was truly unbelievable. His terrifying talent was undoubtedly displayed. If he really grasped the power of the divine king realm, perhaps the two of them together would not be his match. They would be punished. Moreover, the inheritance of the old divine king was absolutely flawless. It was not something that they could compare with after breaking through to the divine king realm with the help of the extreme evil origin. We can't give them another chance. The mastermind wielded a long spear and charged at Lin Yu. The heavenly phoenix looked indifferently at the mastermind and the six-winged God King. Your opponent is me. 3 million years ago, you schemed to suppress me. I wonder if you still have such means now. The five-color divine fire of the heavenly phoenix, supported by the great solar Buddha's Tao, enveloped the entire sky region and burned the extreme evil origin into nothingness. The aura of the Vairocana Buddha. Do you think that the combined strength of two half-step godly kings can stop me? The cold light in the six-winged God King's eyes turned into lightning. It was incomparably terrifying. You would give it a try. The heavenly phoenix stood proudly in the void, his expression unchanged. He then sent the dark priest and the rest out of the sky region. This level of battle was not something that they could participate in, and now they were going to use the entire sky region as their battlefield. Young divine king, accept the inheritance with ease. My test is not that simple. The heavenly phoenix looked indifferent. However, Lin Yu knew that even though the heavenly phoenix was infinitely close to the God King state, this final step was like a chasm that was impossible to cross. But as the energy within Lin Yu's body gradually faded, there was no other way. Just then, a lazy voice rang out from within Lin Yu's body. What a good sleep! Bai Xiaoli had awakened at the critical moment. Lin Yu had thought that Bai Xiaoli's slumber would last for a long time. But he did not expect that Bai Xiaoli would take the initiative to appear at this critical moment. It's all thanks to your origin substance. Otherwise, I might not have been able to wake up without hundreds or thousands of years. Bai Xiaoli reverted to her original form of the nine-tailed celestial fox, looking sleepy. How could this be? You're covered in blood, and you look so pathetic. He then turned around and saw the six-winged God King. So it's the little six-winged bird. Bai Xiaoli's current strength was almost at its peak. Her identity was extraordinary to begin with. She came from one of the 10 great sacred grounds. Because of the connection between the sacred grounds and the 12 universes a million years ago, she inadvertently came to the 12th universe. In her weakened state, she was ambushed by the six-winged God King, causing her to lose her physical body and fall into a long slumber. It's that nine-tailed celestial fox. The six-winged God King's expression changed once more. Back then, when Bai Xiaoli came to the 12 universes, she was severely injured and her strength was greatly reduced. She could barely maintain her saint state. The six-winged God King was jealous of her origin source and attacked secretly. The two of them had long formed a huge grudge. However, Bai Xiaoli was only in her soul state and her strength had not fully recovered. She was only at the half-step God King state. Lin Yu channeled the remaining God King state energy into her body. Bai Xiaoli had been lodging in Lin Yu's body, and her aura was fused with his. Therefore, she was not rejected by Lin Yu's God King state energy. Hold them back for a while. Lin Yu said to Bai Xiaoli. What do you mean hold him back? I'll be lucky if I don't kill him. She felt the energy in her body. Bai Xiaoli chuckled. She actually took the initiative to attack. Chapter 1128. The nine tails pierce through the heavens and the earth. Even the Archaeosaurs and the others who were teleported out of the celestial domain were surprised. Another godly king's aura. The Archaeosaurs murmured. It's the demon beast in his highness body. I didn't expect his true strength to be so terrifying. The sea god dragon was also surprised. However, with their experience, they naturally sensed it. Sky Phoenix and Bai Xiaoli had not completely reached the godly king realm. They had used special means. However, it was crucial for Lin Yu to receive the complete inheritance of the old godly king in delay time. Everyone was relieved. They looked at the celestial domain that had been pierced through and were all worried. If Lin Yu failed, no one in the 12 universes would be able to stop the six-winged godly king. After that, the 12 universes would become the lackeys of the 10th universe. The will of the old godly king would also be completely destroyed. All they could do now was hope that Sky Phoenix and Bai Xiaoli, who had suddenly appeared, could stop the six-winged godly king and a mastermind. Sky Phoenix and Bai Xiaoli nodded slightly at Lin Yu. Then they charged forward. Endless divine fire spread. The 9 huge foxtails were like an ancient mountain range, intertwined with divine power that did not belong to the 12 universes. The celestial domain that was enveloped by the origin of utmost evil. Under the collision of these forces, what little remained of the earth was also shattering inch by inch at this moment, and finally, it was annihilated into nothingness. Lin Yu closed his eyes. At this moment, the godly king's order was emitting a gentle aura that wrapped around him. Lin Lu's whole body was wrapped in a mysterious aura. Not long after, a cocoon created by chaos was formed. Within it, there was a power that made one's heart palpitate. At this moment, the six-winged godly king and Bai Xiaoli looked anxious. We must not let Lin Yu succeed. This opportunity belongs to me. The two voices were cold and emotionless. As the six-winged God King waved the banner in his hand, The abominable origins of the entire heaven domain gathered, turning into numerous evil spirits of unknown size. The evil spirits came from all directions, attacking Baishali and the heavenly phoenix at the same time. At the same time, the evil spirit opened its ferocious mouth in Lin Yu's direction. Baishali snorted coldly. White divine light gathered in his hand. Because he had been residing in Lin Yu's body for a long time, his control over the old God King's power was not difficult at all. It was as easy as waving his arm. The divine light condensed into a divine disk in his hand, which carried with it an ancient aura. He had also absorbed and refined a portion of the origin substance. It was a natural counter to the techniques of the six-winged divine king and the others. Above the wheel, there seemed to be 6 paths. Baishali waved her arm. The divine wheel shattered everything and directly shattered all the evil spirits that had gathered. At the same time, the divine will did not stop. After killing the evil spirits that were approaching Lin Yu, it charged towards the 6-winged divine king with an endless amount of divine power. Even the heavenly phoenix was slightly surprised by this scene. He did not know Baishali's identity, but this kind of divine power and technique was too mysterious. Even he had never seen it before. Without a doubt, this divine wheel could definitely injure a God King expert. The mastermind looked at the incoming divine wheel and directly waved the ancient spear in his hand, shattering the divine wheel. The terrifying aftershock caused cracks to appear in the space, even affecting the space-time here. Amidst the chaotic aura, Baishali was very decisive. She rushed out from the aftershock. Her palm turned into the color of black jade and directly slapped the spear of the mastermind. This attack vaguely caused the ancient runes on the spear to dim. The mastermind behind the scenes was sent flying by the force of the palm strike. What ant? If it weren't for the fact that my strength has not recovered, even if the people behind you came, they would have to kneel and beg for mercy. Baishali returned to her original position in disdain, but there was the power of divine consciousness rising in her hand. Obviously, this attack had also caused her quite a bit of damage. The mastermind's eyes had a dim light. You are not a creature of the 12 universes. Which sacred ground are you from? The mastermind's universe was very powerful, so naturally, he had a deep understanding of the entire vast space. From the few techniques that Baishali had used, he had a rough idea where she came from. Which sacred ground I come from. Are you worthy of knowing? Baishali said disdainfully. When I was at my peak, I wouldn't even look at an ant like you. The mastermind felt humiliated. This was something he had never encountered in the millions of years that he had been in the 12 universes. He regarded the creatures of the 12 universes as ants. And now, he was also looked down upon by a creature from sacred ground. I don't care which sacred ground you come from. Today, you will die here. The mastermind said coldly. You are not a godly king yet, and you dare to order me around and spout nonsense in front of me. At the level of a godly king, one's Tao heart was indestructible. Naturally, they would not lose their rationality just because of a few words from the enemy. When a mastermind attacked, the power it contained was vast and boundless. At the same time, the 6-winged godly king held the banner and went up against Tianfeng. With their strength, they had already seen through Tianfeng, and Baishali's realms were not stable. Although they had the strength of a godly king, it was impossible for them to hold on for a long time, or even win. Even if it was just half a step away from the godly king realm, it was still a world of difference. It was an insurmountable chasm. At this time, Tianfeng and Baishali were also in a bitter battle. Every attack from the 6-winged godly king and the mastermind contained boundless power. It tore the entire heaven region apart. Even the sky was collapsing. At this time, Lin Yu, who was receiving the complete inheritance, felt as though his consciousness had entered a land of chaos. There were no physical objects or objects in this place. Looking up, he could not see anything. The only thing that was left was a dead silence. Lin Yu stood where he was and looked at everything around him. He was deep in thought, and at this moment, suddenly, a meteor fell from the sky with a fiery glow illuminating the place. At this moment, it seemed as though the chaotic fog was dispelled temporarily. At this time, Lin Yu also saw the real scene. He was standing above a water surface. On the surface of the water, his own shadow was reflected. As the meteor approached, a terrifying aura pressed down on Lin Yu. This was definitely the aura of a godly king. Under this terrifying pressure, it seemed as though it wanted Lin Yu to submit and kneel down. I do not fear the power of a godly king. I'm here to get him. In just an instant, Lin Yu's body was shattered, revealing hideous wounds. However, his body was still standing straight. He was not shaken in the slightest by the oppressive might. Until Lin Yu's essence, energy, and spirit rose, he looked directly at the falling meteor. His blood dripped onto the mirror-like water surface. Faint ripples appeared, and Lin Yu's reflection gradually blurred. In the end, the reflection slowly separated from Lin Yu's feet and floated 100 feet away. Then, it condensed into a body on the surface of the water. It turned into a body that was exactly the same as Lin Yu's. However, it had a terrifying power. I am you, a godly king. What will you get in the end? The reflection raised his hand and wiped the water surface. Then, images appeared on the surface of the water, starting from Lin Yu's life until the passage of time. He led the dark divine priest and the others to purge the 3 realms and 5 regions. Finally, he went to the heavenly region and fought with the 6-winged divine king. In the end, everyone died, and only Lin Yu was left. His hair was white, and he sat at the end of the universe. After the great battle, nothing will be left. Only you will be left, overlooking the ages and accompanying the divine path. The reflection of Lin Yu said slowly. It was as if this was not an illusion, but something that would happen in the future. Chapter 1129. Lin Yu's state of mind was affected. It became incomparably heavy and oppressive. Even if you were a godly king, can you stop the enemy from above? Every word and sentence of Lin Yu seemed to come from Lin Yu's heart. All sorts of questions made him feel lost. Gradually, a sense of loss appeared in his deep eyes. As time went by, the falling star was getting closer and closer. The blazing radiance illuminated the entire place. Lin Yu's eyes were unfocused. The situation had reached a critical point. As long as the falling star descended, if Lin Yu still did not understand, it would mean that he had failed the test. He was not qualified to receive the godly king's inheritance. At this moment, the cocoon wrapped in Tao laws emitted endless flames that burned through the sky. Violent energy was wreaking havoc. Many small pieces of land in the already fragmented celestial region were turned into ashes. The heavenly phoenix, who was fighting with the 6-winged divine king, frowned. He had already sensed that Lin Yu, who was in the midst of the inheritance, was in big trouble. Seeing this scene, the 6-winged god king and the mastermind both had smiles in their eyes. Once the inheritance failed, it would be irreversible. It was irreversible. What awaited Lin Yu was only death. There was no chance for him to reverse the situation. "Kid, what are you doing?" Bai Xiaoli scolded. There was some kind of Tao law in her voice. Like a great bell, she wanted to pull Lin Yu back from his trance. However, the godly king's order was so mysterious. Moreover, it had the inheritance of the old godly king. Bai Xiaoli had not recovered her strength and could not interfere. Right now, Lin Yu was in an extremely dangerous situation. After all, the heavenly phoenix duo did not possess the strength of a true godly king. They were starting to lose their strength. At this moment, they were just in front of Lin Yu, barely resisting. The Archaeosaurs and the others could also sense the heavenly phoenix's essence blood in the sky above the celestial region. Bai Xiaoli's aura was also weakening. At this moment, their hearts were heavy. If the 2 of them were defeated, everything would be destroyed. In the future, the 12 universes would only become a breeding ground for the 6-winged God King and the 10th universe. As for all the living beings here, they would fall into complete darkness. They could only wait for the chaos of darkness to begin and be reaped by the 6-winged divine king and the others. Thinking of this, The Archaeosaurs and the others were disappointed, because the Archaeosaurs and the sea god dragon had been entrusted by the old king of gods. They could sense the aura of the king of gods token the most. At this time, they had already discovered that Lin Yu, who had inherited the god king's legacy, had a major problem. The aura there became extremely violent. Even the realm sea, close to heaven domain, was collapsing right now, producing endless abysses one after another. Your Highness, you have to hold on. The Dark High Priest's aura was very weak at the moment. His origin had been exhausted. He was barely holding on with the help of the Heavenly Phoenix's power. His eyes were filled with worry as he muttered to himself. Along with the agitation of his emotions, dried black blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. Everyone knew how terrifying the legacy of the old king of gods was. He was the master of the 12 universes back then, an absolute unblemished realm god king. He had even prepared to break through to the realm above the god king realm as early as 3 million years ago. Moreover, it was highly likely that he would succeed. However, the six-winged divine king's betrayal later on caused a major problem with the old king of God's body. In the end, he had no choice but to take the previous life of Lin Yu with him and disappear from heaven domain. It was extremely difficult to inherit the power of such a peerless hero. The Archaeosaurs and the others knew that. However, Lin Yu was on the verge of failure. Even Lin Yu's aura was gradually disappearing from the world. In everyone's hearts, it was gradually being forgotten. This trend was almost irreversible. Tears fell from the corner of Qin Yi's eyes. To let Lin Yu, a Saint Realm cultivator, bear all of this, and now he was about to die. It was too difficult for her to accept. However, for the greater good, for the entire world, there was no other way. Today, in the 12 universes, only Lin Yu had the ability to fight against the six-winged divine king. He was also the only one who was qualified to receive the legacy of the old king of gods. The six-winged divine king had started the dark turmoil. For the sake of all living beings in the world, and to preserve the fire of the 12 universes, Lin Yu had no choice but to attack heaven domain in advance and forcefully start the final battle with the six-winged divine king. Everything was regretful and hopeless. If Lin Yu was given time, it was not impossible for him to break through to the God King realm on his own. This situation made everyone feel hopeless. Following Lin Yu's position, the violent power became increasingly difficult to contain. The last beam of light shot up into the sky and swept across the heavens and earth. It even forced the 4 people who were attacking each other to retreat at the same time. Everyone looked at this scene in shock. Lin Yu, who was in the middle of the beam of light, was slowly dissipating. Even the immortal consciousness that had gone through 100,000 years of reincarnation was dissipating at this time. We failed, the Archaeosaurs and the others murmured softly. Their eyes were already filled with despair. There was too little time. Lin Yu was only in the initial stage of the Saint Realm. It was too difficult for him to receive the legacy of the God King. No, Qin Yi was heartbroken. At this time, she was lying on the warship and sitting down. There was no trace of life in her eyes. Goddess Yuqing's delicate body was also trembling slightly. However, her back was facing everyone, so no one could see her expression clearly. A sorrowful aura pervaded the entire heavens and earth. Even the laws of the 12 universes shrouded Lin Yu's dissipating body at this time. An endless rain of blood was falling. It swept through the 3 realms and 5 regions. It was as if even the heavens and earth were crying. The living beings in the 3 realms and 5 regions who were lucky enough to survive were all kneeling on the ground. The scene of Lin Yu's Tao disintegration was reflected in the heavens. The only person who could resist the 6-winged divine king is now going to die. There were old people who were at death's door who were lucky enough to survive. At this time, 2 lines of tears flowed down their wrinkled faces. Heavens, how unfair are you? You've destroyed all the living beings' chances of survival. The peerless young divine king shouldn't end like this. A living fossil was kneeling on the ruins at this time. At this time, he was in grief. He was one of the few who knew the truth. Moreover, because of the divine item, he had been living from 3 million years ago until now. Since I can't see the light, why am I still alive now? He looked up to the sky and roared. In the rain of blood, he questioned the laws of the heavens and earth. However, all of this would be for naught. Some were sad, some were in despair. All the living beings in the 3 realms and 5 regions seemed to have lost their souls at this time. Everyone in the primitive continent, which was not affected by the dark turmoil, was in a daze. The sun in the sky lost its original brilliance and became incomparably dim. The weak light could not sweep away the haze in people's hearts. The moment when the heavenly phoenix and the others were killed. It was also the moment when the only pure land in the primitive continent was destroyed. All the living beings in the heavens and earth who were lucky enough to survive all had heavy hearts. After being temporarily suppressed, the endless darkness would descend upon the 12 universes in an even more ruthless and vast manner. Chapter 1130. At this moment, Heavenly Phoenix was under the attack of the 6-winged Divine King. The extreme evil origin was gradually devouring the divine flames. As for Heavenly Phoenix, his true spirit was also gradually dispersing. Vaishali was also in danger. At this moment, he was pierced by the sword of the mastermind. His consciousness, which was originally an illusion, became even weaker. Heavenly Phoenix tried his best to break free. However, his entire body was festering, and his body was on the verge of collapse. As the banner of the 6-winged Divine King waved, he could no longer hold on. The Dharma of the Vairocana Buddha in his body was directly dispersed. In the end, his body fell into the broken celestial domain. Vaishali looked at this scene with a ferocious look in his eyes. But now that he was severely injured, there was no way he could turn the situation around. Everything will be settled. The 12 universes will be completely under my control. The 6-winged Divine King laughed. He came directly to the continent of the celestial domain, lifted Heavenly Phoenix's body, and laughed wantonly. His laughter echoed in the 3 realms and 5 regions. Everyone was in despair. In the end, Vaishali's consciousness became illusory, almost on the verge of destruction. His 9 tails were all severed at this moment. The mastermind sneered. The powerful aura forced Vaishali to retreat. I won't kill you. If I refine such a powerful consciousness, my cultivation will definitely rise to another level. The mastermind made his move. Boundless extreme evilness source energy swept out, trapping the weakened Vaishali in his hands. At this moment, the power of the Divine King's order disappeared completely. Accompanying it was Lin Yu's figure and aura. Defeated. They were completely defeated. At this moment, the eyes of the Archeasa rose, and the others revealed a look of determination. They used their methods to send the remaining survivors to the primitive continent. You guys go. How many of you can survive depends on your luck. The sea god dragon said, I remember that some of you survived. After a long time, you will remember that I am a Qilin. The Archeasaros also spoke. As they closed the realm gate, the Jade Pure Goddess, the Gushu Saint, the Archeasaros, and the Sea God Dragon. These were the only saints in the world. At this moment, their bodies erupted with unprecedented power. All of them did not hesitate to burn their origin. They knew that even if they burned their source energy, they would not be able to fight against the Divine King. However, as long as they were able to buy some time for the remaining troops to escape, their goal had already been achieved. Old Dragon, I didn't think that we would die in the same grave even though we never slept together. The primordial Qilin smiled bitterly, but it didn't forget to joke. Don't try to annoy people here. The sea god dragon scolded. However, his tone turned gentle as he said, the heaven region is a good place to be our graveyard. When Goddess Yuqing saw that Lin Yu had died, there was no trace of anger on her face. There was no greater sorrow than a dead heart. After seeing Lin Yu's Tao immolation, she no longer had the desire to live. The sound of the zither resounded throughout the heaven domain. The jade pure divine maiden was the first to arrive. The song of the nine heavens tribulation in her hand was melodious. However, it seemed very sad in this devastated land. Jade pure divine maiden, if you submit to me now, I might consider letting the remaining people go. The six-winged divine king saw the jade Qing divine maiden appear in the sky. The Guqin in her hand shone with thousands of rays of light. However, all the attacks dissipated with a wave of the six-winged divine king's hand. Arceus arose, and the others were like blazing suns, temporarily releasing their last rays of light. The six-winged divine king and the mastermind only looked at them mockingly, their faces full of disdain. After this battle, it should be a long time before we see the birth of a Saint Realm expert. The six-winged divine king smiled. He wasn't feeling regretful. The evil origin had already affected his temperament. Now he was treating the living beings in the world like seedlings, waiting for the next harvest. Without the birth of an expert, the speed of his cultivation progress would be greatly reduced. Now, I am the sky of the 12 universes. The six-winged divine king stood in the sky. Endless black thunderbolts descended. Just the aftershocks made Arceus arose and the others cough up blood. Their bodies cracked. However, they didn't seem to fear death. They didn't even adjust their chaotic auras as they attacked the six-winged divine king in the sky. Ents, how dare you challenge the sky? The six-winged divine king faced Arceus and the others. His roar turned into a terrifying blast. The sea god dragon was the first to bear the brunt. His body cracked. Half of his huge dragon body was broken. His Saint Realm blood splattered everywhere. It was a hideous sight. He was like a remnant of a primordial divine mountain that fell into the chaotic zone. He wanted to get up, but the evil origin in his wound was constantly devouring his true spirit. In a short while, the sea god dragon was almost dead. The dragon scales all over his body were falling off. The sea god dragon gritted his teeth and used his claws to pull out his reverse scale. It turned into a heavenly sword and attacked the six-winged divine king. This was his last and strongest attack. The reverse scale was the source of his cultivation and the foundation of his life. Now, the sea god dragon chose to use it himself. He knew that even if he used the reverse scale, he wouldn't be able to harm the six-winged divine king. However, he didn't hesitate at all. Now that he was being corroded by the evil origin, he was about to die. Old Loach. The Arceus' eyes were filled with hot tears. Although the two of them had been targeted their entire lives, they were still deeply saddened by the death of one of them. The Arceus looked up at the high and mighty six-winged divine king. His eyes were filled with determination. He exploded his jade horn and followed the reverse scale to attack the six-winged divine king. At this moment, Saint Gushu let out a long sigh. Without any hesitation, he ignited the source energy in his body to the extreme. The four of them were the only surviving saints in the 12 universes. They were the only ones who were qualified to stop the six-winged divine king and the mastermind behind the scenes. Although it was like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. However, they were like ants trying to shake a tree. They believed that millions of years later, there would still be rumors about them in the 3 realms and 5 regions. The Jade Pure Divine Lady also moved. She carried her Guqin and turned it into a rain of light. She chose to sacrifice herself. Under the support of the Jade Pure Goddess, the power of the primordial Qilin and other techniques became extremely terrifying. Even a half-step divine king, who had already surpassed the Saint Realm, might not be able to withstand such techniques. However, they were too weak for the six-winged divine king and the others. No matter where he stood, it would be very difficult to injure him at all. The heavenly phoenix was pierced through by the banner and nailed to the ground. With his last breath, he struggled and spat out the 5-color divine fire from his mouth. It contained all of his origin. It was also his final attack. The six-winged divine king and the mastermind behind the scenes only watched this scene indifferently. Clearly, they had lost their patience. "I'll send you on your last journey," the six-winged divine king said indifferently. With a lift of his hand, the evil origin began to gather. In the sky, it formed a vortex larger than a continent. Then it casually absorbed all of the techniques. Moreover, the vortex did not stop. Instead, it slowly pressed down on the Archaeosaurus and the others. The six-winged divine king wanted them to feel boundless terror before they died. However, the Archaeosaurus and the others were calm. They did not feel the slightest fear in the face of death. I hope that millions of years later, there will be a successor who will kill you completely. The Archaeosaurus was neither servile nor overbearing. He stood quietly on the spot and allowed the vortex to press down on him. Is that so? The six-winged divine king smiled. The evil origin condensed in his hand and turned into a speck of light that devoured everything. Then, he slowly threw it in the direction of the primitive continent. The terrifying pressure made everyone unable to breathe. There is no doubt that this attack could completely destroy the primitive continent. Moreover, under the strange power of the evil origin, the origin of all living beings would be taken away. And now no one could stop him. The Archaeosaurus and the others silently looked in the direction of their homeland. Their eyes were filled with reluctance and nostalgia. They did not fear death. Instead, they regretted their own incompetence. They did not protect the world and caused the current misery and suffering. Chapter 1131. Their faces were filled with the will to die. Bai Xiaoli was currently trapped in the cage created by the abominable origin energy, trying her best to break free. But now, the God King realm energy within his body was fading away. In the end, it completely disappeared, and his cultivation realm fell. In the end, it was difficult for him to maintain his half-step God King realm. And just as the attack of despair was about to descend, even the entire primitive continent was being torn apart. The great sun in the sky was slowly turning into dust. Right now, even the great solar boundless Buddha, Lord, was powerless to reverse the situation. One could only hear him sighing. Within the sun, the great solar Buddha's body was slowly disintegrating. In the last remnants, he sent a portion of the living beings to an unknown place. Qin Yi and the others were grieving. At the same time, they wanted to break free from this power and return to the heaven region. Even if they were to die, they did not want to linger on like this. One crack after another appeared in the sky. The endless, abominable origin energy began to invade the primitive continent. All of the living beings fell limply to the ground. Be it the immortal sex or the mortals, all of them were in despair. There was no one left to save them. Qi. And at this moment, a different aura appeared in the entire 3 realms and 5 regions. It was vast and unparalleled. Endless pressure came crashing down. The abominable origin energy was collapsing inch by inch. There was no room for resistance. The despairing black sky revealed a white light. The 6-winged God King and the mastermind looked in a certain direction at the same time. It was the direction of the primordial continent, somewhere in the forgotten immortal sect. Endless chaos filled the air. The disciples and elders of the forgotten immortal sect were already in despair. But under this unparalleled aura, they all knelt on the ground. There's still an expert, or no one dared to believe it, until the sky was filled with chaos. A tall figure, dressed in white, with an aura that made people want to kneel on the ground and pray devoutly. He slowly walked out of the chaotic Qi. There was no aura coming from his body. A white great Tao appeared beneath his feet, connecting the heaven and earth. It was Lin Yu, who had failed to accept the God King's inheritance and died. And now, he had returned once again. He had revived from death. Moreover, judging from the aura he was emitting, he was definitely in the God King realm. He was the most powerful existence in the entire 12 universes. Is this the meaning of Father's legacy? Lin Yu looked at the thatched cottage behind him. During the 100,000 years of reincarnation, he woke up from it every day. And now, after his death, it was retold once again. He only glanced at it casually. It was as if nothing in the world could stir his emotions. He looked in the direction of the heaven region. As he took a step forward, a path constructed from primordial matter appeared beneath his feet. It was simple and majestic, and it felt as if time and space were flowing backward as he stepped onto it. It was just a step. Lin Yu returned to the battlefield. The sky enveloped by the abominable origin was instantly shattered. Lin Yu's tall and straight figure appeared on the battlefield. Before he even did anything, he had already eliminated all of the berserk energies in this place. At this moment, as long as he stood here, it was like the end of the world, making it difficult for others to reach and look up to him. A flawless God-King realm. It was not the step that the six-winged God-King used the origin of all living beings to forcefully break through. Center of the 12 universes, six-winged, beheaded. A faint voice spread throughout the 3 realms and 5 regions. Tears flowed down the dark priest's face. Lin Yu directly teleported the Archaeosaurus and the others far away. At the same time, he healed their injuries. The powerful and natural power made everyone fearful. Everything happened too quickly. Even the Archaeosaurus and the others did not react at this moment, until they saw Lin Yu's face clearly. "Your Highness, young God King," everyone murmured. Unexpectedly, they thought that Lin Yu had completely died. At this moment, at the most critical moment, he actually appeared again, and he even broke through to the God King realm. That kind of power that could turn something rotten into something magical caused everyone to be shocked. After Lin Yu sent them away. At this moment, there was only Lin Yu, the six-winged God King, and the mastermind in the entire shattered heaven region. Lin Yu's figure stood under the sky. Now, more than half of the heaven region's sky was illuminated by light again. Most of the abominable origin had already dissipated the moment Lin Yu appeared. "You actually came back to life." The six-winged God King was in disbelief, because Lin Yu's true spirit had dissipated not long ago under the power of the God King order. It was impossible for him to come back to life again. But now that Lin Yu appeared in front of them again, they had no choice but to believe it. Although Lin Yu was dressed in white, the aura he emitted was not violet. But as long as he stood there, all the power in the world had to submit to him automatically. At this moment, Lin Yu was the master of the 12 universes. This was the true God King realm, flawless and untainted. Even a mastermind's forehead was covered in cold sweat. After 3 million years, the second God King was finally born in the 12 universes. The old God King had created a golden age, and Lin Yu had quelled the black calamity. He would lead the 12 universes and officially stand side by side with the other universes. This was the true final battle. Everyone held their breaths and looked at the 3 figures in the sky of the heaven region. "Give up resisting, and perhaps I can let you die in peace," Lin Yu said slowly. Arrogant. Facing Lin Yu, the six-winged God King felt immense pressure in his heart, because at this moment, he realized that he could no longer see through Lin Yu's strength. "You have just grasped the power of the God King realm. How dare you be so presumptuous?" The six-winged God King shouted. "Once I kill you and absorb your origin, my strength will rise to another level." The six-winged God King's banner appeared in his hand again. The vast, evil origin shrouded his body, and the intertwining patterns on his body became even more ferocious and terrifying. In the end, they crawled all over his face. "It's enough to kill you," Lin Yu said faintly. He raised his palm. The fragments of the Emperor's sword that had been shattered during the previous battle gathered together and appeared in Lin Yu's hand. A biting cold aura covered the sky and earth. At this moment, Lin Yu's body emitted the true power of the God King realm. The severely injured heavenly phoenix looked at the heaven region with satisfaction. His mission was finally completed. Then he slowly fell asleep. "Your Highness," the jade pure divine lady murmured. Although her origin had been restored under Lin Yu's magical power, there were still many fatal wounds on her body. However, there was no pain in her eyes now. Instead, there was joy in them, just like 3 million years ago when she was playing with Lin Yu in the city of God Kings. The darkness will end, and the light will shine on the earth again, St. Gushu said slowly. They all knew that Lin Yu, who had grasped the true power of the God King realm, would end everything. In the heaven region, as Lin Yu swung his sword calmly, it seemed to cut through time and space. Even though the six-winged God King and the culprit worked together, they still could not resist and were sent flying. Even the banner and the long spear had cracks that were difficult to restore. This scene shocked the six-winged God King and the God King. They did not expect the current Lin Yu to be so terrifying. It was hard to find anyone in the 12 universes who could stand up to him. Even though the culprit had broken through to the God King realm with the help of the evil origin, he still felt helpless against Lin Yu. Chapter 1132. The feeling that Lin Yu gave off was like a vast and unfathomable universe. His body carried the aura of returning to one's natural state. Just a simple slash caused the six-winged Divine King and the Divine King to cough up blood. The six-winged Divine King finally felt fear. He realized that Lin Yu was undefeatable, but it was all too late. Lin Yu took a step forward, not giving the six-winged Divine King and the Mastermind any chance to catch their breath. It was the same slash. The six-winged Divine King's arm that was holding the banner was chopped off, although a Divine King's powerful and indestructible body could recover quickly. But this slash did not just chop off the six-winged Divine King's arm. It also destroyed his mental state as a Divine King. Is this what you want to become in such a hideous state? Lin Yu asked coldly, as he approached step by step. The Mastermind approached from behind, wanting to launch a sneak attack on Lin Yu. However, as Lin Yu turned around, his eyes emitted a deep radiance that carried the terrifying power of time. The ancient spear in the Mastermind's hand was decaying inch by inch. Soon, it was deformed, as if it had been dug out from an old grave. It no longer had the original form of a spear. Moreover, this power did not stop after the decaying spear. Instead, it began to spread towards the Mastermind's arm. The Mastermind was very decisive and threw the spear away. Then, he gathered the origin of extreme evil in his hand, turning it into a black dragon that roared and charged towards Lin Yu. Strange runes intertwined on the black dragon, with a terrifying devouring power. It wanted to forcibly extract Lin Yu's origin. However, this method was not effective against Lin Yu at all. Dense origin matter appeared on Lin Yu's body. The black dragon was like ice in the early spring and began to melt. Before it could reach 100 feet from Lin Yu, it turned into dust. Lin Yu turned his gaze to the six-winged God King. He swung the long sword in his hand, and at the same time, origin matter gathered in his other hand, which seemed to be nurturing the power of reincarnation. This was the power that Lin Yu had comprehended after breaking through to God King after experiencing 100,000 years of reincarnation on the same day. Now, the dark hand behind the scene was somewhat terrified. He muttered in disbelief. He came from the 10th universe, and there was more than one Divine King expert in it. Among them, there were also unblemished God Kings. However, now that he saw Lin Yu's technique, he had a bad feeling. This was because even God Kings should not be able to grasp this power. This was what Lin Yu had comprehended when he had made a breakthrough into the Sage Realm. At that time, the rules of the heavens and earth had disallowed it, and the heavenly punishment had been sent down. However, Lin Yu concealed it and kept it in his body. In other words, Lin Yu's comprehension had already surpassed the Divine King realm. Now that he had made a breakthrough, he had vaguely possessed this power among his various techniques. This was also why he could suppress the six-winged God King and the six-winged God King without the slightest resistance, even though he had just reached the Divine King realm. I can't let this child grow up, otherwise it will definitely be a huge hidden danger for the 10th universe. The dark hand behind the scenes murmured in his heart and made up his mind. This was because in the godly monarch realm, there was only one person in Universe 10 who had comprehended the path ahead. That person was the current ruler of Universe 10, who possessed this kind of talent. If Lin Yu was allowed to grow, It was not impossible for him to reach the realm of the ruler of the 10th universe, or even higher. At that time, the 10th universe would undoubtedly be in deep trouble. This was something that the dark hand behind the scenes would never allow. In his eyes, the 12 universes were extremely weak, and the creatures in them should only be nourishment for his 10th universe. How could he tolerate the creatures in the farm to transcend and eventually threaten the 10th universe? At this time, the dark hand behind the scenes moved. Black lightning filled the sky, and it was extremely strange. The entire world fell into darkness, and all light was swallowed up. Lin Yu stood under the lightning that filled the sky. He was as calm as an ancient well, and his expression did not change. He raised his left hand. The origin matter turned into a huge millstone, exuding an ancient and vicissitudes of life. The evil origin between heaven and earth was constantly being purified, and finally turned into pure energy matter that was fed back to the 3 realms and 5 regions. The black lightning above was also annihilated inch by inch as the millstone continued to expand. The dark hand behind the scenes gritted his teeth and spat out a mouthful of blood essence. Then he gathered all the evil origin in his hand. He did not hesitate to destroy all his plans of 3 million years to kill Lin Yu. Because to him, Lin Yu's talent was too terrifying. Even the ruler of the 10th universe had forcefully interfered with time through supreme means, causing errors in Lin Yu's reincarnation. As a result, his cultivation was still stuck at the saint realm in the dark turmoil. But it was in this desperate situation that he still broke through to the godly king realm and gained some insight into the next step. This kind of person should not appear in the weak 12 universes. All the evil origin condensed in the dark hand behind the scenes. In the sky of the 3 realms and 5 regions, all the strange aura faded and gathered in the direction of the celestial domain. Are they preparing to launch the final attack? The Archaeos arose, and the others all sensed it, and at the same time, they felt uneasy. After all, the evil origin was very strange, and after the dark turmoil, it had absorbed the true spirits and origin of billions of creatures. Coupled with 3 million years of accumulation, no one knew how terrifying it had become. The figure of the mastermind had already transcended the sky region. The boundless, abominable origin source gradually turned into a black skull in his hand. Is this the original appearance of the evil origin? Lin Yu looked on indifferently. He originally thought that the evil origin was formed before the birth of heaven and earth in the land of origin. Now, it seemed that it might have come from a creature. Lin Yu thought of the supreme expert who had created the 12 universes and 10 sacred lands that Bai Xiaoli had mentioned. Perhaps there was a connection. This made Lin Yu speculate. He looked at the evil origin that had condensed into a black skull. His expression was still calm. He raised his hand and took the millstone formed by the origin matter into his hand. Incomparably mysterious runes intertwined on it, nurturing his understanding of the godly king realm. Its current power was definitely not weaker than any godly king weapon, and even vaguely surpassed it. The current Lin Yu was the strongest weapon in the world. Whether it was the 6-winged godly king or the dark hand behind the scenes, they were far from reaching this level. Lin Yu's Emperor's sword left his hand and merged with the millstone. The powerful force caused the space-time here to become chaotic. Vaguely, the long river of time appeared. The history of the Qingyun domain appeared one after another, then shattered. The Emperor's sword merged with the millstone, and without any hesitation, it attacked the dark hand behind the scenes. The 6-winged godly king stood up with difficulty and appeared beside the dark hand behind the dark hand. Lin Yu did not care about the 6-winged godly king. His gaze was now focused on the dark hand behind the scenes. He wanted to completely kill the dark hand behind the scenes, and then deal with the matters of the 12 universes, the 6-winged godly king who had started all of this. The entire void was cracking, and the stars in the universe were rustling and falling. Primordial matter poured in through the gap in the sky of the Qingyun domain. At this moment, the dark hand behind the scenes, who was controlling the skeleton formed by the evil origin, gradually showed signs of not being able to continue. Black blood continuously flowed out of his mouth. It seemed that he could not hold on any longer. Six-winged godly king, what are you waiting for? The dark hand behind the scenes was now terrified. The abominable origin source that had been nurtured for 3 million years was still unable to overwhelm Lin Yu. Chapter 1133. Even now, it was being suppressed. The six-winged divine king gritted his teeth and circulated his cultivation. The power in his body gathered towards the skeleton. The skeleton faced the origin substance and began to roar mournfully. It seemed that its consciousness was recovering. The six-winged divine king and the mastermind were both sent flying by the roar. Black blood flowed out of their mouths. At this moment, more than half of the power in his body was absorbed by the skeleton uncontrollably. His aura immediately withered. At this time, the strange skull began to form a complete body. An extremely strange aura filled the air. It was as if one was in the nine hells, and one's true spirit was heading towards destruction. Lin Yu's body emitted a hazy halo, isolating this aura. At the same time, he guessed that this origin substance of utmost evil was born from some kind of living being. He learned from the mastermind that this substance was definitely not only in the 12 universes. If that was the case, then what kind of living being would have such great power? Its aura could affect the entire great universe. After Lin Yu slashed apart the all-destroying aura with his sword, the skeleton, which already had a vague consciousness, actually took the initiative to move towards Lin Yu. Chains gradually appeared behind it. It was unknown where they were connected to. This was definitely a power that surpassed the Divine King realm. If it really descended into the 12 universes, the entire universe might collapse because of it. Lin Yu's pupils contracted slightly. He seemed to see a corner of the scene at the end of the chains. There seemed to be a coffin in the unknown place. Everything around it was dying. Time and space were all around the coffin. They were analyzed into the most original substance, turning into Tao laws. There seemed to be a few corpses in the dark area. Their auras were suppressing the aura emitted by the coffin. That supreme and strange aura was the origin substance of utmost evil. In other words, the coffin in the unknown place was the origin of the origin substance of utmost evil. Lin Yu could not help but frown. Although the living beings suppressing the coffin could not be seen clearly, they gave off a feeling that they were too powerful. It was as if they could crush everything. Lin Yu could feel the immense pressure just by looking at it. Above the 12 universes, there were still huge secrets hidden. Lin Yu realized this. The skeleton was getting closer and closer to him. Its body was emitting an irresistible aura. It was as if his physical body and consciousness were being pulled into the skeleton's world without his control. Even the living being in the coffin wants to take me away, Lin Yu said coldly. He raised his hand and waved it. The Emperor's sword that returned to his hand emitted a blazing radiance. The two people behind the scenes watched in astonishment as Lin Yu faced the skeleton without retreating. Instead, he took the initiative to attack it. The origin substance on his body was now steaming like flames. The entire universe was enveloped by Lin Yu's aura. At that moment, he was actually contending with the aura of the unknown land behind the skeleton. He wasn't at a disadvantage at all. This made the mastermind, who knew the terror of the unknown land, reveal incomparable shock in his eyes. In his long cultivation life, logically speaking, he shouldn't show such emotional fluctuations. But after seeing Lin Yu's talent, he completely couldn't suppress it. Now, he actually showed the intention to retreat. But Lin Yu wouldn't give him the chance. Chi, multicolored light, filled the sky. Lin Yu stood on top of the skeleton and directly pressed down on it. Amidst the unknown vast means, the unknown passage was being destroyed at a speed visible to the naked eye. The skull also began to slowly shatter from the shape it had just formed. Everything happened too quickly. Now, Lin Yu's strength was so powerful that it was terrifying. He was the absolute ruler of the 12 universes. The Mastermind and the Six-Winged Divine King suffered a huge backlash. Cracks appeared on their bodies. The Mastermind was finally scared out of his wits. In his eyes, the supreme means of the abominable origin was still easily broken by Lin Yu. Now, what other means could he use to stop Lin Yu? The Mastermind forcibly supported his body, pulled the Six-Winged Divine King, and opened a passage. Terrifying spatial fluctuations descended on the entire celestial domain. The origin of the array was constructed by stars that were comparable to suns, intertwined with mysterious spatial runes. The moment the passage appeared, the entire celestial domain, and even the primitive continent, could feel the violent spatial fluctuations. This was the array that the Mastermind had brought over. It could cross the entire universe. Now, he was no longer in the mood to fight. Instead, he wanted to escape with the Six-Winged Divine King and return to the 10th universe to make further plans. This was a trap left behind by the Mastermind. Once the array was activated, it couldn't be closed. The Mastermind turned to look at Lin Yu. His eyes were once again filled with mockery. If Lin Yu chased after them, then he would definitely follow them to the 10th universe. At that time, the ruler of the 10th universe will be able to kill Lin Yu with a move of his hand. Today, you have won. When we return to the 10th universe, I will definitely make a comeback. At that time, the entire 12 universes will be buried with you. The Mastermind laughed. His figure slowly disappeared. Lin Yu didn't speak. He took a step forward and stepped directly into the passage. This stunned the Mastermind slightly. Then he laughed. Do you know that there's always someone better than you? You are in the unblemished Divine King realm. Do you think that no one in the world can keep you in check? Lin Yu broke free from the powerful spatial fluctuations. Then he took a step forward. He directly caught up with the Mastermind and the Six-Winged Divine King. I said that today, you will be punished. Lin Yu said indifferently. With a raise of his hand, he directly imprisoned the heavily injured Mastermind and the Six-Winged Divine King with the power of the Divine King realm. He wouldn't let anyone go today. The Mastermind and the Six-Winged Divine King were struggling in the passage. But now that they were heavily injured, they couldn't do anything. The flow of time here was extremely fast. In almost the blink of an eye, the three of them were about to leave the 12 universes and go to a vast, unknown land. Do you think that by killing us, you can end everything? The Mastermind finally had a trace of fear in the face of death. At this moment, he spoke in a threatening manner. Let me tell you, doing this will only speed up the pace of my 10th universe's destruction of the 12 universes. However, only Endless Sword Light responded to him. In just an instant, the Mastermind was pierced in many places. Even if he tried his best to resist, the power that Lin Yu now had was beyond his imagination. Chapter 1134. Then, the origin substance exploded in the Mastermind's body, destroying his vitality in an irreversible manner. Even a godly king had strong vitality. But under Lin Yu's means, it was still difficult to recover. The Mastermind coughed up blood. The six-winged, godly king wanted to stop him, but he was sent flying by the origin substance in his body. He crashed into the passage. Cracks appeared in the passage, and chaotic aura spread out from it. At this moment, the power of the godly king's order burst forth in Lin Yu's hand, imprisoning all time and space. Then, Lin Yu grabbed at the void. The position of the six-winged godly king and the Mastermind gradually became illusory. The immortal passageway was crumbling apart continuously. The power of space of the godly king's order became incomparably vast, causing the entire 12 universes to tremble. The six-winged godly king and the Mastermind had already escaped from the 12 universes, but now they were retreating. Then, the passage in the heavenly domain slowly cracked open, and black cracks began to spread. Endless power of space shattered the stars and land. The power of the godly king's order was emitted. The heavenly domain, which had long been shattered into ruins, seemed to be experiencing reincarnation. The land constantly returned to its original state, and then it was destroyed again. Impossible! This passage was personally built by the ruler of our universe. How can it collapse? Because of this. The mastermind was in disbelief. But the passage was completely imprisoned, and then, from the end, it was covered with cracks like a spider web. Under the power of the godly king's order, it was destroyed inch by inch. This was also the reason why Lin Yu dared to chase after the mastermind and the six-winged godly king, knowing that they wanted to escape. He had long understood the mystery of the godly king's order. Now that he had reached the godly king realm, it was still difficult for him to completely understand his previous system, which was the godly king's order. It seemed to be shrouded in a layer of fog. But with Lin Yu's current realm, he could be considered to have completely mastered the godly king's order. He could borrow the power of space and time on it. They could lock down space or turn back time. In the passage, the mastermind and the six-winged godly king fell and were captured back to the 12 universes. Before the two of them could stabilize their bodies, Lin Yu's sword had already pierced through the chest of the mastermind. The mastermind's pupils contracted. Lin Yu's expression was cold. 3 million years. It's time for you to die, Lin Yu said slowly. Then, the power in his hand gradually became more and more intense. The withered hand of the mastermind held onto the Emperor's sword, after which he crushed a jade strip in his hand. I didn't want to use it at first, but you forced me to. The murderous intent in the eyes of the mastermind had reached its peak. As his life force continued to flow away, it turned corporeal, like a human-shaped incense stick, burning continuously. As the jade slip shattered, it fused with the life force of the mastermind. A mysterious aura was recovering continuously. It seemed to have communicated with something beyond the 12 universes. The new godly king of the 12 universes, can you spare my life? At this time, outside the 12 universes, a voice that ignored everything sounded. This sentence was not a request, but an order from above. The owner of the voice had definitely surpassed the God King realm. His figure gradually materialized. It was majestic and boundless. Just its eyes were like huge stars intertwined with runes. There was not the slightest emotion. On behalf of the 10th universe, I can have a truce with your 12 universes for 1,000,000 years. After the voice sounded, a mysterious power descended, wanting to bring back the mastermind. However, with Lin Yu's mind, the mastermind couldn't move at all. Even the phantom outside the 12 universes was at a loss as to what to do. If you could descend to the 12 universes, I'm afraid you would have come long ago. Lin Yu looked at the shadow outside the 12 universes and said very calmly, "What truce for 1,000,000 years? If you want to come, then take advantage of it now. I'll take it all." After saying that, on the Emperor's sword in his hand, the origin matter spread out. Like a bone spur, it instantly wiped out all the life force of the mastermind. After that, his entire body slowly turned into dust and disappeared into thin air. "You're good." The voice of the shadow outside the 12 universes was filled with murderous intent. The murderous intent turned into a substance, enveloping the entire 3 realms and 5 regions. A large number of mountains and rivers were collapsing because of it. Lin Yu stood motionless above the void, letting the murderous intent turn into a substance, fluttering his clothes. "You, including the 12 universes, can't withstand my anger." The shadow was cold. However, in the face of the death of the mastermind, there was no trace of pity. Why should the 12 universes flatter and be reduced to lackeys? Lin Yu spoke slowly. Today, the 12 universes are officially on par with the other universes. If other universes are discovered with ulterior motives, those who sneak in will be killed without mercy. His voice echoed. Then, it turned into a golden decree. Under the power of the God King's decree, it directly cut through the boundaries of the 12 universes. It went to other universes. Very good. 100,000 years later, I will personally start an expedition. At that time, the entire 12 universes will be reduced to dust, the final voice sounded in the entire 12 universes. It didn't dissipate until a long time later, and the huge stone that shrouded the hearts of many creatures was finally lifted. After everything was dealt with, Lin Yu saw the seriously injured six-winged Divine King. Winner takes all. My little brother, your current accomplishments are truly shocking. The runes on the six-winged Divine King's face had dimmed a lot after all the evil origin dissipated. At this moment, the six-winged Divine King was like an old man in his twilight years, without any vitality. He fell to the ground, and his six wings were already in tatters. His aura was very weak, and it seemed that he couldn't even stabilize his God-King realm. At this moment, the six-winged Divine King seemed to suddenly wake up. His face was full of regret, with strong remorse for all living beings. I have let down the billions of living beings in the 12 universes. I have let down the title of number 1 on the celestial god list. I colluded with the 10th universe and trapped the entire 12 universes. The six-winged Divine King murmured. Lin Yu slowly approached the six-winged Divine King's position. When Lin Yu and the six-winged Divine King were very close to each other at this moment, the six-winged Divine King suddenly picked up the large banner beside him. He had already condensed a powerful force in his hand. He didn't hesitate to sacrifice the Emperor Artifact banner and use all his strength at the same time, all for the sake of completely killing Lin Yu. However, as Lin Yu calmly raised his arm and pointed with a finger, the violent force dissipated. The six-winged Divine King was still hoping that Lin Yu's heart was still as indecisive as it had been for 3 million years. But now, it seemed that Lin Yu was already prepared. Chapter 1135. Lin Yu didn't give the six-winged Divine King any more chances. Atone for your sins in this broken heaven domain for all living beings and for Father. Lin Yu made his move. He extracted all the power from the six-winged Divine King's body. Fear spread through the six-winged Divine King's body. But no matter how he struggled, it was useless. His body was forcefully pressed onto the ground by Lin Yu. Rumble. Lin Yu condensed a piece of the broken heaven domain into a vast and endless piece. The six-winged Divine King roared unwillingly. Then, his body gradually petrified. He was completely suppressed by Lin Yu. He knelt on the ground of the heaven domain, facing the direction of the 3 realms and 5 regions. The remaining wisp of the six-winged Divine King's true spirit was imprisoned in his petrified body. In the endless years, he would atone for the sins of all living beings and the old Divine King. He would never be able to rise again. Lin Yu stood in front of the stone statue of the six-winged Divine King without the slightest emotion. The mastermind had already been destroyed in body and soul, and the six-winged Divine King knelt in the heaven domain. At this point, the chaos in the 12 universes came to an end. The war that had lasted for countless years was now completely over. The final battle ended with Lin Yu forcefully killing 2 God Kings, all by himself. The light between heaven and earth shone on the ground once again. It shone on the devastated ground. Everyone knelt on the ground at this moment. Today, the entire 12 universes praised the name of the Divine King Lin Yu. Endless power of faith gathered towards the domain. His body was enveloped in the radiance of divinity. But he didn't refine the power of faith. He used the Emperor's sword as a guide and constructed the phantoms of Lin Xiu and the others who died in the battle. He hoped that in the long years, he could condense their true spirits. At this moment, the Dark Priest and the others also came behind Lin Yu. Congratulations, Your Highness. At this moment, the Archaeos arose and the others knelt on the ground. Now, Lin Yu was already the master of the 12 universes. Even the proud heavenly phoenix was half crouching on the ground. His attitude was respectful. Rise, all of you. Lin Yu's back was facing the crowd. He looked at the shattered sky with disappointment in his eyes. This was not the end of the war. Although Lin Yu had broken through to the God King realm, he knew that the God King realm was not the end. In ancient history, and even in other universes, there were stronger people. Moreover, The ruler of Universe 10 had a realm that was hard to fathom. He could manifest a phantom across endless space-time. Because Lin Yu had broken through to the God King level, the 12 universes were now on par with the other universes. However, because of this dark turmoil, the 12 universes had suffered a great loss of vitality. It was very likely that it would be difficult for them to recover their previous strength in the next million years. In the entire universe and holy lands, there were too many enemies. Now, Lin Yu was supporting the 12 universes by himself. In the end, it was too difficult. The Dark Divine Priest and the others all saw this. But with their cultivation realms, there was nothing they could do. Although they were in the Saint realm and ranked at the top of the 12 universes, in the eyes of the other universes, they were not enough. Even in the final battle, it was difficult for them to play a substantial role. In the next few hundred years, there were many things waiting to be done. The Dark Priest and the others had already entered and exited the 3 realms and 5 regions. They began to reorganize, lead the remaining living beings, and began to build a new order. Lin Yu, on the other hand, had completely disappeared after the battle. No one knew where he was now. In an unknown place in the 12 universes, 2 ordinary-looking people, a man and a woman, appeared. They were sitting on a boat. They were Lin Yu and Goddess Yuqing, who had disappeared for hundreds of years. At this moment, the 2 of them were like an ordinary couple in the mortal world. This was what Lin Yu had promised Goddess Yuqing. When everything was settled, he would take her to travel the mountains and rivers. The mountains on both sides of the river slowly retreated. Occasionally, there would be the cries of apes and birds. On the bank of the vast and misty river, there was an old man wearing a straw raincoat fishing on the river. He looked at the man and woman in the river with a smile on his face. The old man fishing was none other than Mahavarakkana Buddha, who had been awakened by Lin Yu and had recovered his cultivation. Another few hundred years passed like this. Lin Yu and the others returned to the Heavenly Alliance again. The scale of the Heavenly Alliance now was unimaginable. It was even more majestic than the destroyed city of Divine Kings in the Heavenly region. This place had become the center of the 12 universes. Cultivators were constantly coming in and out. After this war, many people realized how insignificant they were. Many of them had been in seclusion for many years. Lin Yu and Goddess Yuqing, who were dressed in plain clothes, came to the magnificent city gate. "Stop! Do you have permission to enter the city?" At this moment, a young soldier blocked their path. His face was very young, but there was a serious look on his face. This was the center of the 12 universes. Everything was in order. Naturally, the security was also very tight. Lin Yu looked at the young soldier and smiled with satisfaction. However, the soldier quickly said coldly, "If you don't have any orders, please leave immediately." The soldier held a long saber in his hand and placed it in front of the 3 of them. "You're not bad." Lin Yu smiled faintly. At this moment, the plain clothes on his body disappeared and were replaced by a white robe. Goddess Yuqing and Mahavarakkana Buddha also revealed their original appearances. Although they didn't deliberately release their auras, one could feel the supreme aura from just a glance. Even the mountains and rivers changed color. At this moment, those who were queuing up to enter the city, regardless of their strength, were all shocked by this aura. They all looked over at the same time. This person looks like the statue of the Divine King in the center of the Heavenly Alliance city. The soldier looked at Lin Yu and murmured softly. Then he suddenly woke up. The Divine King has returned. What? The Divine King has returned. Everyone was shocked. Then, the warships that were floating in the air all landed on the ground. The soldier was trembling with excitement. The person in front of him was the expert who had saved the entire 12 universes 1,000 years ago. He was the only Divine King in the world today, Lin Yu. "Greetings, Divine King." Welcome back, Divine King." The soldier was so excited that he couldn't speak clearly. The Divine King was their savior. Ordinary people only had a lifespan of 100 years. However, this young soldier was only in his teens. He was chosen to guard the Heavenly Alliance city, because he was extremely talented. The legend of the Divine King had always been passed down by word of mouth. Now that he saw the Divine King in person, how could he not be excited? Even the elders who had lived for 1,000 years were so excited that tears flowed down their cheeks. The current Divine King had left behind countless legends. Now, he had appeared outside the Heavenly Alliance again. At the same time, they looked at the soldier with evil intentions. They thought to themselves, this kid is really blind. He even dares to stop the Divine King. Divine King, I was blind. Please forgive me. The soldier cowed out. It's okay. You did the right thing. Very good, Lin Yu said nonchalantly. Then, he slowly entered the Heavenly Alliance under the sincere kowtow of the crowd. Before leaving, he gently touched the soldier's head and passed down an unimaginable opportunity. When the crowd saw this, some of them were so envious that they almost screamed. The Divine King actually touched the soldier's head. The soldier felt comfortable all over. He had broken through several realms, which made the crowd jealous. The general who wanted to punish the soldier slowly stood up after Lin Yu and the other two left. He patted the soldier's shoulder and said, "Well done." This was undoubtedly the best incentive for the soldiers. This young soldier would definitely soar to the skies from a humble family in the future. This let everyone know that as long as they were serious and responsible, they would be able to obtain opportunities. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.